To our amazing Cheating Tales Lab community, welcome. We appreciate you joining us for another story. We've prepared something special that we hope you'll enjoy. Let's begin this story. The chandeliers cast a warm glow across the Chicago Business Awards ballroom, their light reflecting off crystal glasses and polished cufflinks. Nicholas Knox adjusted his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, more comfortable in work boots and a hard hat than black tie attire. Still, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a self-made man who'd built his construction empire from the ground up. Mr. Knox. A young reporter from the Tribune approached, notepad ready. Any comment on your wife's nomination? Allison's work speaks for itself. Nicholas replied with a measured smile, noting how the reporter's colleague whispered something and quickly averted his gaze. It was the third such odd interaction of the evening, but he dismissed it as pre-award jitters. At their assigned table, Nicholas found himself seated with Chicago's business elite. Richard Massey, founder of Massey Enterprises, offered a handshake that felt somehow apologetic. His son Thomas, the company's CEO, was conspicuously absent from his usual seat. Quite the turnout, Richard commented, studying his wine glass. Nicholas, perhaps we should. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC's voice boomed through the speakers. Please welcome our host for the evening, Senator Catherine Walsh. The senator took the stage, her political smile firmly in place. Tonight, we celebrate excellence in Chicago's business community. Our next award recognizes a woman who has revolutionized corporate finance. Nicholas felt pride swell in his chest. 15 years of marriage, and Allison still amazed him. They'd started with nothing, him working construction sites while she pursued her MBA at night. Now as Knox Construction handled major projects across 3 states, while she'd risen to CFO at Massey Enterprises. The Businesswoman of the Year award goes to Allison Knox, Chief Financial Officer of Massey Enterprises. Applause erupted as Allison rose gracefully from her seat at the adjacent table. Not their assigned one, Nicholas noted with slight confusion. Her red designer dress caught the light as she ascended the stage, accepting the crystal trophy with practiced elegance. Thank you, Senator Walsh. Allison's voice carried clearly through the ballroom. This award represents years of dedication, not just mine, but the entire team at Massey Enterprises. Nicholas smiled, remembering late nights discussing strategy at their kitchen table. But most importantly, Allison continued, her expression shifting subtly, I want to thank my best supportive work husband of 15 years, Thomas Massey. The room fell silent. Nicholas felt his world tilt sideways as Thomas emerged from the wings, striding across the stage with triumphant confidence. Honey, I couldn't do it without you. Allison purred into the microphone before Thomas pulled her into a passionate kiss. Nicholas moved without conscious thought, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence as he approached the stage. What the hell is all this? The question cut through the tension like a blade. Allison pulled away from Thomas, her mask of sophistication dissolving into something ugly and foreign. You're such a pathetic, weak husband, Nicholas. Her words dripped with contempt. While you were playing with your little construction projects, Tommy and I built an empire. Face it, I make more money than you ever will. She turned on her heel, trophy in hand, leaving Nicholas standing alone in the spotlight. Thomas smirked, wrapping an arm around Allison's waist as they exited stage left. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Nicholas remained still, his expression carved from stone. Senator Walsh approached, concern evident on her face. Mr. Knox, I had no idea. Excuse me, Senator. His voice was quiet but firm. I believe I've had enough entertainment for one evening. As he walked through the parting crowd, he caught fragments of conversation. Been going on for months. Everyone knew except him. Poor man, so humiliating. Outside, the valet brought his Range Rover. Nicholas gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The drive home was a blur of city lights and racing thoughts. Their brownstones sat dark and silent, mocking the life he thought they'd built. Morning brought clarity and fury. Nicholas's phone buzzed incessantly. Reporters, business associates, concerned friends. He ignored them all, focusing instead on his laptop screen. Their joint accounts, empty. Investment portfolios, transferred. Even their shared safety deposit box had been cleared out the previous week. His private office at Knox Construction offered no refuge. A stern-faced IRS agent waited with his assistant, Rhonda, who couldn't quite meet his eyes. "Mr. Knox, we're initiating an audit of your company's finances for the past 5 years." Nicholas accepted the documents without comment, noting Rhonda's nervous fidgeting. Before he could address it, his brother Jay burst in, looking harried. "Nick, Jesus, I've been trying to reach you all morning." Jay ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Look, there's something you need to know." "That you knew?" Nicholas's voice remained eerily calm. "How long, Jay?" His brother collapsed into a chair. 6 months. "Nick, I wanted to tell you, but Allison, she threatened to revoke my contracting licenses. Said she'd make sure Knox Construction never worked with Massey Enterprises again. And that was enough to betray your own brother? She has dirt on everyone. Nick, the way she and Thomas operated, it wasn't just an affair. They've been planning this for years." Nicholas leaned back, studying his brother's face. "Tell me everything." The story unfolded like a cheap tabloid drama. Their mutual friend Renee McCall, the attorney who'd handled Nicholas's contracts for years, had been providing his beach house for Allison and Thomas's rendezvous. Jay's wife Judith, always so proud of her social connections, had helped Allison hide assets through her network of wealthy friends. Even Rhonda, Jay added quietly. Allison offered her a position at Massey Enterprises, executive assistant to the CFO. Nicholas pressed the intercom. "Rhonda, could you join us?" His assistant entered, clearly fighting tears. "Mr. Knox, I'm so sorry. I never meant." "Sit down, Rhonda." Nicholas's tone was neither kind nor cruel. "I want you to tell me exactly what information Allison asked for and what she promised in return." An hour later, Nicholas sat alone in his office, processing everything he'd learned. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined, spreading through his business and personal life like poison. His phone buzzed, a text from Thomas Massey. "Dinner at Gibson's, 8 p.m. Let's discuss this like businessmen." Nicholas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Gibson's was where he'd first met Allison, back when she was a promising junior analyst and he was bidding on his first major project. How fitting. The steakhouse hummed with expensive conversation and the clink of fine china. Nicholas arrived precisely at 8, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that spoke of power rather than wealth. Thomas waited at the bar, nursing a scotch. "Knox." Thomas raised his glass in mock salute. "Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it." Nicholas ordered water, noting how it irked Thomas. "I assume Allison won't be joining us?" "She's meeting with the lawyers, drawing up a generous settlement offer." Thomas leaned forward, his perfect veneers gleaming. "Be smart, Knox. Take the deal. You're out of your league here." Nicholas allowed himself a small smile, one that made Thomas shift uncomfortably in his seat. "Interesting choice of words, Tommy. We'll see who's out of their league soon enough." He stood, leaving his water untouched. "Give Allison my congratulations on the award. She always did know how to put on a show." Later that night, Nicholas sat in his home office, surrounded by files and financial records. His phone rang. Dominic Daniels, the private investigator he'd hired that morning. "Mr. Knox? You're going to want to see this. I've got surveillance photos from Renee's beach house. Regular meetings, not just Thomas and Allison. Shell company executives, offshore banking representatives. Send everything to my secure email." Nicholas opened his laptop. "And Dominic? Keep digging." As dawn broke over Chicago's skyline, Nicholas Knox finally allowed himself to rest. The strategy was taking shape in his mind, clear as the architectural plans he'd built his company on. They thought him weak, a cuckolded husband too pathetic to fight back. They would learn otherwise. In his bedroom, he opened the safe hidden behind an abstract painting, one of Judith's overpriced recommendations. Inside lay documents he'd accumulated over years of business dealings, leverage he'd never thought he'd need. Photographs, bank statements, recorded conversations. Nicholas Knox had built his empire from nothing, understanding that in construction, the foundation matters more than the facade. While they'd been playing their game, he'd been building something too. Now it was time to watch their house of cards collapse. The morning sun glinted off Renee McCall's beach house windows as Dominic Daniels adjusted his telephoto lens. From his vantage point, he had a clear view of the weekly gathering: Thomas Massey's silver Mercedes, Allison's Range Rover, and 3 other luxury vehicles belonging to executives Nicholas Knox had identified as shell company operators. Dominic's phone buzzed. "What do you have for me?" "Mr. Knox, you'll want to see these photos." Dominic watched through his lens as Thomas handed thick envelopes to 2 men in expensive suits. "But there's something else. Been doing background on McCall's real estate dealings. Found some interesting connections to overseas accounts. Send everything to my office. And Dominic, make sure Mrs. McCall receives an anonymous package with select highlights." 3 days later, Naomi McCall stormed into her husband's downtown law office, throwing a manila envelope onto his desk. "Care to explain these, Renee?" The prominent attorney's face drained of color as photos spilled across his mahogany desk. Intimate gatherings at his beach house, financial documents showing questionable transactions, and evidence of his role in hiding Allison and Thomas's affair. "Naomi, I can explain. Save it for the SEC," she snapped, pulling more documents from her designer bag. "I've already spoken with them about your creative accounting at the Marina development." Renee's carefully constructed world crumbled within hours. By evening, his partners had called an emergency meeting. By midnight, he was calling Nicholas Knox. "What do you want?" Renee's voice cracked with desperation. "I'll tell you everything about their operation." Nicholas's response came cold and clear through the speaker. "You had your chance to do the right thing. Now you get to watch everything burn. Knox, please. I can help you. Like you helped Allison and Thomas destroy my marriage. Goodbye, Renee. Give my regards to Idaho." The next morning, Chicago's business community buzzed with news of Renee McCall's sudden retirement and relocation. Thomas Massey paced his office, phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean he's gone? He knows everything about the shell companies." He turned to find Allison in his doorway, her expression dark. "Knox is behind this," she said. "Time to show him what happens when he plays in the big leagues." The attack came from all directions. Anonymous complaints flooded the licensing board about Knox construction. OSHA inspectors appeared at every job site. Major clients received concern calls about project delays and safety violations. Wesley Sharp, Nicholas's project manager of 12 years, watched the third surprise inspection that week with growing anger. Another complaint: "Mr. Knox, they're trying to shut us down." Nicholas studied the latest report. "How are the crews holding up?" "Loyal to the bone. They know what this is about." Wesley's weathered face hardened. "Though Massey's people tried to change that. Offered me 6 figures to accidentally delay the Riverside project." Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "And?" Wesley pulled out his phone, playing a recorded conversation. Thomas Massey's voice filled the office. "Just one missed deadline, Mr. Sharp. Knox Construction loses its performance bond. We step in with Massey Development. Everyone wins." "Got it all on tape," Wesley said proudly. "Nobody breaks up this family." Across town, Judith Knox Harrison sipped champagne in her Gold Coast penthouse, plotting damage control. The socialite had built her reputation on managing delicate situations, but Nicholas's systematic dismantling of Renee McCall threatened everything. She arranged a dinner at Gibson's, choosing a private booth where Chicago's elite handled their most sensitive negotiations. Nicholas arrived exactly on time, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than the ones he used to wear. Success, Judith noted, suited her brother-in-law. "Be reasonable," she urged, studying his impassive expression. "Allison's offering a generous settlement. Think about the family." Nicholas took a measured sip of water. "Family? Like when you helped her hide assets through your art gallery connections?" "That was business." Speaking of business, Nicholas slid a folder across the table. "How's Edwin's gallery doing?" "Must be challenging, balancing all those international art purchases with Chicago's money laundering laws." Judith's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she opened the folder. "Where did you get these?" "The same place I got proof of Jay's involvement in procurement fraud." Nicholas stood, adjusting his cuffs. "You chose sides, Judith. Now you get to live with the consequences." The family dinner a week later felt like a wake. Jay Knox sat at his usual place, but his usual confidence had vanished. His largest clients had received detailed documentation of his kickback scheme that morning. How could you? Nicholas's voice cut through the tense silence. Not just the betrayal, but feeding information to Thomas while pretending to support me. Nick, please. Save it. Nicholas placed a USB drive next to Jay's plate. That contains everything I have on your dealings. The authorities receive copies tomorrow unless you tell me everything you know about their operation. Every shell company, every hidden account. Jay's face crumpled. They'll destroy me. No, little brother. You did that yourself. The information Jay provided filled in the final pieces. Nicholas now had a complete picture of Thomas and Allison's elaborate financial scheme, and more importantly, their vulnerabilities. At his office, Nicholas reviewed the intelligence with Dominic. They're leveraged through shell companies, using stolen corporate funds to maintain the illusion of success. Like a house of cards, Dominic observed. Exactly. And we're about to pull out the bottom row. Thomas continued his campaign against Knox Construction, unaware of the trap closing around him. Each OSHA inspection found Nicholas's sites exceeding safety requirements. Every complaint backfired as clients witnessed Knox's professional handling of the harassment. Allison grew increasingly frustrated. Nothing works. His reputation is actually improving. Patience, darling. Thomas kissed her neck, not noticing her slight flinch. He'll break eventually. Everyone does. But Nicholas Knox didn't break. At charity galas and business functions, he appeared maddeningly unaffected by their public displays of affection. His company continued securing major contracts. Worse, his calm confidence seemed to be attracting supporters. Did you see the way the mayor's wife snubbed me? Allison complained after one event. And the Johnson account. They're considering switching their commercial development to Knox Construction. Thomas slammed his glass down. Then we'll have to hit harder. Call your contact at the Tribune. It's time for some creative journalism about Knox's business practices. But before they could launch their media attack, the ground shifted. Renee McCall's disgrace had created cracks in their foundation. Judith's art gallery faced a surprise audit. Jay Knox's clients were deserting him. Their carefully constructed network of allies was unraveling. Nicholas watched it all from his office, overlooking the Chicago River, Wesley Sharp at his side reviewing project updates. They're getting desperate, Wesley noted. Heard they tried to bribe Rodriguez on the hospital project. He recorded everything, just like I did. Nicholas nodded. Loyalty matters, Wes. That's something they never understood. Speaking of loyalty, Wesley hesitated. Rhonda asked to come back. Said she made a mistake listening to Mrs. Knox. To Allison. What do you think? She's a good assistant. And she chose to warn us about their media plans instead of taking their offer. Nicholas considered this. Set up a meeting. Everyone deserves a chance to choose the right side. The battle had evolved beyond personal betrayal into a war of attrition. Each week brought new attacks from Thomas and Allison, each one anticipated and deflected. Nicholas's countermoves were subtle but devastating. Key investors growing wary, banking relationships strained, whispers of regulatory scrutiny. He's playing a longer game than we thought, Thomas admitted during a late-night strategy session. Maybe we should consider a more aggressive settlement offer. Allison's laugh held an edge of hysteria. It's too late for that. Don't you see? He's not interested in money. He wants to destroy us. Then we'll destroy him first. But their next move never came. Nicholas had already laid the groundwork for Act 3, though they didn't know it yet. As Thomas prepared for his upcoming investor conference, Nicholas's team was quietly acquiring debt from their shell companies through untraceable entities. The stage was set for the final act. Nicholas sat in his office, reviewing the evidence one last time. Photos from Renee's beach house. Banking records from Judith's gallery. Jay's procurement documents. Recordings from Wesley and other loyal employees. All the pieces assembled into a devastating picture of corporate fraud and personal betrayal. His phone buzzed, Dominic with one last update. They're planning something big for the investor conference. Want me to intervene? No. Nicholas smiled. Let them make their move. Everything's ready on our end? All set. Just waiting for your signal. Nicholas ended the call. walking to his window to watch the sunset paint Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and blood red. Tomorrow would change everything. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment to appreciate the poetry of it all. They thought they were destroying him. Instead, they'd given him the weapon of his revenge, their own arrogance. The marble lobby of Chicago's Financial District Tower buzzed with anticipation. Investors and media gathered for Massey Enterprises' annual conference, where Thomas Massey would present their latest projections. Security guards checked credentials while Thomas rehearsed his speech in the executive suite above. The numbers look perfect, Allison assured him, adjusting his tie. Stop fidgeting. Knox has been too quiet lately. Thomas shrugged off her hands. It makes me nervous. He's finished. The OSHA investigations, the licensing complaints. He's probably drowning in legal fees. Neither noticed the discreet movement of suited figures through the building's secondary entrances, or the methodical way Nicholas's legal team positioned themselves in predetermined locations. In his downtown office, Nicholas reviewed final preparations with Dominic Daniels. Months of investigation had revealed the full scope of Thomas and Allison's scheme. Shell companies layered within shell companies, corporate funds siphoned through offshore accounts, all hidden behind a facade of legitimate business. Confirmation from our Hong Kong contact, Dominic reported. The last debt purchase is complete. We now control financial obligations for all their major shell companies. Nicholas nodded. And the SEC? Ready to move on your signal. FBI too. Then it's time. Nicholas stood, straightening his jacket. Let's go watch the show. The conference room filled quickly. Thomas took the stage to enthusiastic applause, his trademark confidence on full display. Behind him, presentation slides showed aggressive growth projections and ambitious expansion plans. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas began, Massey Enterprises stands at the threshold of our most successful year yet. Our innovative financing strategies. A subtle ripple of movement caught his attention. Men in dark suits were quietly entering through all three doors. In the back row, Nicholas Knox sat down, opened his laptop, and pressed a single key. Across Chicago, servers hummed as pre-programmed legal filings activated. Claims against every shell company in Thomas and Allison's network hit the system simultaneously. Emergency alerts began flooding investors' phones. Thomas faltered mid-sentence as his own phone buzzed. Then others started ringing throughout the room. The carefully orchestrated presentation dissolved into confused murmuring. If I could have everyone's attention, Nicholas's voice cut through the chaos. He stood, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the growing panic. You might want to see the real numbers behind those projections. The main screen switched to a detailed flowchart of shell companies, highlighted paths showing how corporate funds had been systematically looted. Supporting documentation appeared, bank transfers, forged authorizations, offshore account details. This is outrageous. Thomas sputtered. Security. Remove him? I wouldn't. Nicholas replied evenly. The FBI agents by the doors might object. As if on cue, the suits revealed their badges. Thomas's face drained of color. You'll also find, Nicholas continued, addressing the shocked investors, that all outstanding debts for these shell companies have been acquired by Knox Holdings. As the primary creditor, I'm calling them due. Immediately, the room erupted. Thomas lunged for the podium microphone, but his own security chief stepped in his way. Sir, the guard said quietly, I've been instructed to escort you to the federal agents. Across town, Allison arrived at her office to find FBI agents boxing files. Her executive assistant watched wide-eyed as they methodically documented everything. What is the meaning of this? Allison demanded, reaching for her phone. I wouldn't bother trying the emergency accounts. Nicholas's voice came from her office doorway. They've been frozen. Legal says hello, by the way. Allison's perfectly composed facade cracked. You can't do this. I built this company. No. Nicholas cut her off. You stole from this company. There's a difference. Ask your friend Renee McCall. Oh wait, he's practicing law in Idaho now. She lunged for her computer, but an FBI agent was already disconnecting it. This is harassment. I'll sue. With what money? Nicholas examined his cufflinks. Your personal accounts are frozen too. Even the ones Judith helped you hide through the art gallery. Speaking of which, how is my dear sister-in-law enjoying her husband's divorce filing? Allison's knees buckled. She grabbed her desk for support, designer heels unsteady on the marble floor. How did you figure it all out? You might ask Jay, but he's a bit busy with his own legal troubles right now. Nicholas's smile held no warmth. Family loyalty is such a fragile thing, isn't it? The emergency board meeting that afternoon felt more like a funeral. Thomas and Allison faced hostile investors across the mahogany conference table while Nicholas sat quietly in the back, watching his trap close completely. These allegations are ridiculous, Thomas insisted. Our books are clean. Then explain these. A major shareholder threw down a stack of documents. Shell companies? Offshore accounts? My God. You were even stealing from the pension fund. It's not stealing, Allison interjected. We were reinvesting. Through your private accounts? Another investor stood, face red with fury. I've seen the transfers. If I may, Nicholas spoke for the first time. Perhaps Mrs. Knox would like to explain these recordings? The room fell silent as Allison's voice filled the air, giving explicit instructions to move corporate funds through various shell companies. Each recording was time-stamped, documented, damning. That's taken out of context, she snarled. Really? Nicholas raised an eyebrow. Should we ask your assistant? The one you tried to bribe? Or perhaps Mr. Sharp from my company, who recorded your husband's attempted sabotage? Thomas slumped in his chair, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. Their lawyers huddled in whispered consultation, faces grim. The arraignment 2 weeks later drew media from across the country. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters as Thomas and Allison arrived separately, their designer wardrobes replaced by conservative business attire. Inside, their legal team presented a last-minute deal. Our clients are willing to surrender additional assets for reduced charges, the lead attorney announced. The prosecutor looked to Nicholas, who stood to address the court. In his hand, he held a thin file, the final piece of evidence he'd been saving. Your Honor, before considering any deals, you should see this. He handed over documentation of their most recent attempted fund transfers. Even after the arrests, they tried to hide assets. There's no remorse, no redemption. Only calculation. The judge's expression hardened as she reviewed the evidence. Thomas's swagger vanished completely. Allison's perfectly manicured hands trembled. The court rejects the proposed deal, the judge declared. This level of corporate fraud demands full prosecution. As court officers led them away, Allison turned back. You destroyed everything we built. Nicholas met her gaze steadily. No, he replied, voice carrying in the hushed courtroom. You did that when you chose betrayal over loyalty. I just made sure everyone saw who you really are. The media circus eventually died down. Chicago's business community gradually recovered from the scandal, though certain names remained toxic in boardrooms across the city. Nicholas's construction company expanded, absorbing several of Thomas's failed investments at fire sale prices. Wesley Sharp, promoted to senior management, oversaw the integration of new projects with loyal efficiency. Renee McCall's law license found a new home in Idaho, his Chicago connections worthless in a small-town practice. Judith's husband filed for divorce after the art gallery scandal, her carefully cultivated social position crumbling like a house of cards. Jay's business declared bankruptcy, his clients fleeing en masse after the procurement fraud revelations. Family gatherings became notably smaller, though notably more honest. Rhonda, who'd chosen loyalty over Allison's bribe, found her career flourishing as Nicholas's executive assistant. When reporters requested interviews about the scandal, she became the company's unofficial spokesperson. Mr. Knox never wanted revenge, she told them, seated in the office where she'd once betrayed him. He wanted justice. There's a difference. Nicholas himself declined all interviews, letting the court's verdicts speak for themselves. His focus remained where it had always been, building things meant to last, whether buildings or relationships. The lesson echoed through Chicago's business community. Betrayal carries a price, and Nicholas Knox made sure everyone paid in full. Epilogue, 2 years later. The gates of the Federal Correctional Institution in Pekin, Illinois loomed before Allison Knox, now inmate number 47291. Gone were the Louboutin heels and Chanel suits, replaced by standard-issue khaki uniforms. Her once perfect manicure had grown out, and her carefully highlighted hair showed dark roots beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Mail call, Knox. A guard tossed an envelope through the cell door slot. Another rejection. Her third appeal denied. 15 years with no possibility of parole for corporate fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. The judge had been particularly harsh after Nicholas's evidence revealed her attempts to hide assets even after the arrest. 2 cells down, her former assistant, one of the lower-level employees she tried to blame, served a reduced 3-year sentence in exchange for cooperation. The woman never acknowledged Allison's existence, a daily reminder of her fall from grace. Across the state at the minimum security men's facility, Thomas Massey stared at his own reflection in a steel mirror. 12 years, the judge had ruled. His father Richard had died 6 months into his sentence, the family name in ruins. Massey Enterprises, the company his grandfather built, had been dissolved, its legitimate assets sold off to cover investor lawsuits. Visitor for Massey, a guard announced. Thomas shuffled to the visiting area, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his frame. His mother sat behind the plexiglass, her once proud posture bent with shame. The house sold, she reported flatly. Barely covered the legal fees. I'm moving in with your sister in Milwaukee. Thomas pressed his hand against the glass. Mom, I'm sorry. She stood, gathering her designer bag, one of the few remnants of their former life. So am I, Thomas. So am I. Meanwhile, Nicholas Knox's corner office overlooked a changed Chicago skyline. Knox Construction's new headquarters occupied the building that once housed Massey Enterprises executive suites. The company had expanded across 5 states, its reputation for integrity attracting clients who'd learned harsh lessons about trusting flashy promises over solid foundations. Wesley Sharp, now Chief Operations Officer, entered with the latest project reports. Hospital wings ahead of schedule. That new sustainable design you implemented is saving them a fortune in energy costs. Nicholas nodded, studying the blueprints. How's the crew integration going? Smooth as silk. Those boys from the old Massey sites? They're grateful for steady work with a straight shooter. Wesley grinned. Speaking of straight shooters, Rhonda's got the quarterly numbers ready. Rhonda Martinez, formerly just Rhonda, had proven her worth 100 times over since choosing loyalty over Allison's bribe. As project management director, she oversaw the company's expansion with meticulous attention to detail. Her office, once Allison's private domain, now hummed with productive energy. The Justice Department called again, Rhonda reported, entering with a stack of files. They want you to consult on another corporate fraud case. Something about your unique perspective. Nicholas smiled slightly. Tell them I'll consider it. How's the foundation project coming? The Knox Integrity Foundation, funded by recovered assets from the Massey scandal, provided scholarships for construction management students and supported whistleblower protection programs. It was Nicholas's way of turning betrayal's poison into something productive. Across town, in a modest Idaho law office, Renee McCall reviewed small claims documents. His Chicago law license remained suspended, his reputation irreparable. Divorce had cost him half of what he had left after the scandal. Naomi had relocated to California with their children, his visitation rights limited by court order. His phone buzzed, another rejection from a major law firm. Even with his reduced sentence for cooperation, no respectable practice would touch him. He'd become a cautionary tale in legal ethics courses. Mr. McCall? His assistant poked her head in. Your 2 o'clock is here. Disputed fence line case. From corporate law to property disputes. From beach house parties to shared office space above a diner. From designer suits to off-the-rack blazers with shiny elbows. Renee straightened his drugstore reading glasses and forced a smile. In Chicago's Gold Coast, Judith Harrison, she'd reverted to her maiden name, hosted intimate dinner parties instead of grand galas. Her social circle had contracted dramatically after Edwin's art gallery scandal and subsequent divorce. The money laundering investigation had cost them everything, including their reputation. More wine, dear, she offered her remaining friend, a similarly disgraced socialite. Did you see the business section? Her friend asked cautiously. Knox Construction's expanding again. They're building that new tech campus downtown. Judith's hand trembled slightly as she poured. Her own financial situation had stabilized at comfortable rather than wealthy after the divorce settlement, but her influence in Chicago society was gone. Young socialites who once begged for her mentorship now crossed the street to avoid her. Her brother Jay had fared worse. After his construction company's bankruptcy, he'd relocated to Phoenix, starting over as a small-time contractor. His involvement in procurement fraud had made him radioactive in Chicago's business community. Monthly alimony payments to his ex-wife kept him in a one-bedroom apartment, despite his attempts to rebuild. Jay's phone lit up with a news alert. Knox Construction wins Sustainable Building Award. He quickly closed it, the familiar mix of shame and regret souring his coffee. The scandal's ripples continued spreading. Thomas and Allison's former social circle had scattered, everyone desperate to distance themselves from the taint of association. Their favorite restaurants hosted new power players at their preferred tables. Their country club memberships had been quietly revoked. In prison, Allison received occasional updates from her elderly aunt, the only family member still in contact. Her parents had retired to Florida, changing their phone number. Her sister had asked her to stop writing. Former friends returned her letters unopened. Her lawyer, one of the few willing to handle her appeals, was brutally honest. The evidence was overwhelming. Knox's documentation was flawless. Even if you serve the minimum sentence, your professional licenses are permanently revoked. The restitution payments will take everything you earn for the rest of your life. Allison spent her days in the prison library, reading business magazines that chronicled Knox Construction's continued success. Every article felt like a twist of the knife, especially the small mentions of Rhonda's promotion to project management director, the position she'd once tried to bribe her with. Thomas occupied his time teaching basic business classes to fellow inmates, a cruel parody of his former corporate presentations. His cellmate, in for tax evasion, actually recognized him from the scandal. "Man, Knox played you like a chess master," the cellmate commented. "Had all the pieces in place before you even knew you were in the game." The observation haunted Thomas. Every move they'd made, every attack they'd launched, had somehow played into Nicholas's strategy. He'd turned their own weapons against them, their arrogance, their greed, their assumption that he'd roll over and accept defeat. Back in Chicago, Nicholas left his office early to meet Dominic Daniels for their monthly dinner. The private investigator had parlayed his work on the Massey case into a thriving practice specializing in corporate fraud. "Got something you might be interested in," Dominic mentioned over steaks at Gibson's. "Remember that offshore account Allison tried to access after her arrest? Found some interesting connections to other cases." Nicholas shook his head. "Send it to the Justice Department. I'm done with that chapter." Speaking of chapters, heard from a publisher lately? They're still dying for your story. Let them wonder. Nicholas sipped his water. Success is the best revenge, and silence drives them crazy. He'd received countless offers, books, movies, interviews, all promising to tell the real story of Chicago's most spectacular corporate takedown. Nicholas declined them all, letting the court transcripts and journalism archives tell the tale. His new penthouse offered sweeping views of Lake Michigan, though he spent more time at construction sites than at home. The building's doorman still had standing instructions to return any messages or packages from Allison, Thomas, or their associates. The only reminder he kept of that time was a framed Chicago Business Award program, dated the night of Allison's public betrayal. It sat on his office wall, not as a wound but as a lesson. Trust must be earned, loyalty must be proven, and justice may take time but arrives inevitably. Rhonda noticed him studying it one morning. "Still hard to believe how it all played out," she observed. "Not really," Nicholas replied. "They thought they were writing a story of triumph over the little construction guy. Never realized they were just characters in a different story entirely." His phone buzzed, the mayor's office, wanting to discuss a major infrastructure project. Nicholas gathered his files, nodding to the program on the wall. "Happy ending optional," he told Rhonda. "Justice mandatory." In their separate prison cells, Thomas and Allison received their daily reminders of this truth. Every meal, every count, every restricted visit hammered home the lesson they'd learned too late. Betrayal carries a price, and Nicholas Knox had made sure they paid in full. Their empire had crumbled. Their reputations were destroyed. Their futures were confined to concrete walls and endless regret. Meanwhile, the man they tried to destroy thrived. His success built on the foundation they'd foolishly thought was weakness, integrity. As Chicago's business community liked to say, there were two ways to learn about consequences: observation or experience. Thomas and Allison had chosen experience, and Nicholas had ensured it was an education they'd never forget. The city skyline continued evolving, Knox Construction's projects adding new dimensions to old perspectives. Each building stood as a testament to what Nicholas had always known. Real power isn't in knocking things down, but in building something that lasts. In the end, that was the true price of betrayal. Watching from behind bars as the future moved forward without them, shaped by the man they'd mistaken for an easy target. They'd gambled everything on the assumption that Nicholas Knox would break. Instead, he'd rebuilt himself stronger, turned their weapons into his tools, and transformed their betrayal into his triumph. It wasn't just revenge, it was reconstruction. And in Chicago's business circles, that made all the difference.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Most individuals lack a true understanding of how lengthy eternity endures, often conflating it with the idea of infinity. However, my personal experience revealed that eternity spanned precisely 15 years, 2 months, 27 days, and several peculiar hours. It concluded much as it began, with my wife, Tracy, affectionately locking eyes with her partner and sharing a passionate kiss. Except this time, I was this partner for the first time, and the kiss followed my proposal for her to be mine forever on the night I presented the engagement ring. In a different setting, I found myself a mere bystander in a restaurant 2 towns away from our residence, as Tracy and an apparent new lover exchanged adoring glances and leaned in for a passionate kiss. The details of how I ended up in the same restaurant as this couple are irrelevant. Their location, an hour away from our hometown, indicated a deliberate effort to remain discreet. Initially curious, my emotions swiftly shifted from curiosity to shock, disgust, and anger. As the scene unfolded before me, I briefly entertained the thought of confronting them physically. However, I was always taught never to smack a woman, so I sat there in complete astonishment. Since they focused solely on each other, feeling secure that no one who knew them would see, they leisurely enjoyed their meal, occasionally engaging in a kissing game. I ate slowly, had dessert, and observed them throughout. My emotions fluctuated between rage and helplessness. Upon finishing their meal, they stood up, held hands, and left. Seated there in silent rage, I felt like the most ignorant fool. I had been married to Tracy for over 14 years, with 2 exclusive years preceding that. Yet, I never suspected she was switching both ways. She never showed interest in another woman, never dropping hints in any conversation we ever had. I erroneously believed I knew her inside and out, anticipating growing old together. The revelation of her switch hitting paled in comparison to the anger I felt at her apparent infidelity, regardless of the gender of her partner. She had redirected her love, betraying the commitment we made many years ago. When she accepted my ring, it signified an enduring eternity, seemingly timeless. Who would have thought that some eternities have an expiration date? Settling the bill, I entered the car and drove home slowly. I had much to contemplate. Tracy did not anticipate my early return after the trip, but fortunately, I resolved all issues ahead of schedule. Hence, I headed home on Friday evening instead of Saturday afternoon as initially planned. I had been away since Monday morning, and apart from missing Tracy and the kids, the absence of closeness for more than 3 consecutive days left me with pent-up energy that needed release, at least until I witnessed what unfolded in the restaurant. I was an hour away from our hometown and could have easily driven straight through. However, since I was ahead of schedule, I opted to go out to dinner for a break from driving, and the rest, as they say, is history. Our kids are 12 and 10, old enough to be left alone for the evening if Tracy wanted to go out, which I had no issue with. However, I wondered if they were aware of the situation, since neither had mentioned anything different, Perhaps they were as in the dark as I was, I thought. Regardless, I knew they wouldn't be pleased with what happened next. On the way home, I engaged in the usual self-analysis. What did I do wrong? How long did it last, etc. At least I didn't have to worry about her lover having a larger manhood than me. Chuckling, I'm talking about myself. Gallows humor. I walked in the door at 9, and Tracy still wasn't home. My daughters Lisa, 12, and Ariel, 10, greeted me happily, but I watched without truly seeing them, nervous and doubtful that I would be home early. The same couldn't be said for Tracy. When Tracy entered about 2 hours later, she must have noticed my car in the garage and freshened up a bit. I observed a shift in her demeanor, appearing less content than in our previous encounters. She inquired about my unexpected presence, expressing concern with her first words. I responded playfully, emphasizing her greeting. Tracy, with a slight twitch in her forehead, mentioned that if she had known I would be home early, she would have prepared a nice dinner. She went on to reveal that she had ordered pizza for the kids, and she and Kate had opted for wine and sandwiches downtown. Tracy, avoiding eye contact, asked if I remembered Kate from my office and if she had mentioned her before. Despite her dishonesty, I replied affirmatively. Tracy then proceeded to sarcastically recall Kate as a blonde with ample chest, remarking on the trail of admirers she left behind. I couldn't help but think that Tracy had the ability to assemble a football team merely by entering a room. This wasn't solely due to her captivating effect on married women. Kate, I mused to myself, possessed the allure of a goddess with her remarkable chest. She was about 26 years old and had started working at the insurance company where Tracy had worked the previous year. The two became instant friends, and apparently, somewhere down the line, at 39 years old, Tracy could still turn more than a few heads. She was also blonde, with a beautiful figure and curves in all the right places. She was only 10 pounds heavier than when we first met, but it was still a great package, and at least until recently, it was exclusively my package. Despite the worried expression on her face, Tracy acted calmly. As for me, I could barely stand on my feet, so I just told her that I was tired and was going to bed. She gave me a quick peck on the lips as I walked past her and headed up the stairs. Perhaps I was mistaken, but I was almost sure that I felt the taste of love-making games on her lips. I went to bed but did not fall asleep. The kids went to bed before me, so when I heard a quiet conversation a few minutes later, I realized Tracy was talking to Kate on the phone. It was a short conversation, and a few minutes later, I heard Tracy getting into the shower in our master bathroom. Either I scared her so much that she quit the game and wasn't as careful as before, or she thought I was dreaming and wouldn't find out about it. My heart sank even lower. Between kid stuff and housework, I didn't have to interact with Tracy too much for the rest of the weekend. She wanted to have a family dinner on Saturday night, but I said I wasn't in the mood and just left the room, effectively ending the conversation. She must have known something was up because I'm rarely rude to her. On Monday morning at work, I requested a day off from my boss due to some personal issues I was facing. Having gone through a divorce about 10 years ago and remarried 5 years ago, John, my boss, had some understanding that something was amiss in the Mason family. Considering the success of my sales trip the previous week, he didn't hesitate when I asked for time off. As I prepared to leave his office, he handed me his business card, revealing it to be that of his divorce lawyer. He conveyed his regret, expressing sorrow for the unexpected turn in my relationship with Tracy. I acknowledged his sentiment, stating that I, too, had envisioned a lasting connection with Tracy. Acting on my boss's suggestion, I sought legal advice 2 days later. Despite my lawyer's potential for a more professional approach, she displayed genuine concern for my emotions and offered gentle guidance. She seemed surprised when I decided against hiring a private investigator to gather concrete evidence of Tracy's infidelity. I detected understanding in her gaze as she pointed out that, in a no-fault state, such evidence might not carry much weight. The primary concern, she noted, could revolve around potential challenges with visitation rights, although she expressed confidence that this would likely not be a significant issue, no matter how hard I tried. Being around Tracy and the girls at home was something I couldn't handle. Tracy likely sensed this, given our minimal communication. I believe the girls sensed something was amiss by our unusual quietness. I gave Tracy numerous chances to talk, but she never seized the opportunity. The situation escalated when Tracy was served at work the following week. Call it petty if you will, but I wanted Tracy to experience even a fraction of the pain I felt. I presume she was served around 11:03 a.m. because my phone started ringing incessantly at 11:05. I ignored all 15 calls from her and several from unfamiliar numbers, suspecting she might be using friends' phones to contact me. Surprisingly, I felt a surge of energy for the first time since discovering her with Kate, and I was having a surprisingly good day. Tracy's car was already in the garage when I arrived at 5:30. She wasted no time acknowledging her presence, expressing her anger about being served in front of friends and colleagues. I remained silent until entering the house and putting down my things. The girls were in the living room, engrossed in what seemed to be a movie on the big screen. I calmly stated that I wanted to ensure she was served alongside her mistress for her own comfort. Tracy's anger disappeared, replaced by tears. I retorted, questioning her knowledge about Kate and remarking on the lack of caution in their actions. I asked her two things: how long and when she had planned to tell me. She responded, admitting it had been about 6 months and insisting they were planning to inform me soon. In less than 30 seconds, Tracy's demeanor shifted from venomous to defeated. She stumbled to the kitchen table and sat down. I walked over to the drinks cabinet, grabbed a bottle of Buffalo Trace bourbon, poured myself a double, and sat across from her. If looks could homicide, she would have perished within the first 2 seconds. I observed her, and she couldn't tear her eyes away from the table. Quietly, I asked how I couldn't have known about her switch hitting after all this time. She responded that she, too, had only recently discovered it about herself. She insisted it wasn't planned, it just happened. Finally, she looked at me and held my gaze, saying that it shouldn't change anything between us. Tracy expressed her continued love for me and the need to explore this new aspect of herself. She asked for my support and more time to explore, stating that it was her turn. I expressed my shock, questioning whether 6 months was insufficient for her exploration. I mentioned that if she truly loved me, she would remember our vows and not entertain the idea of exploring at all. I shared my belief that fidelity transcended gender, and she shouldn't have considered such actions. She countered by suggesting that true love could forgive a mistake, to which I argued that once could be a mistake, but 6 months indicated a conscious decision. I expressed my frustration, emphasizing that love should not give her the license to tear my heart out and jeopardize our family. I asserted that her actions had nothing to do with gender, labeling her self-centered. She retorted, insisting that it had a lot to do with girls, and accused me of being a complainer. I confronted her, accusing her of turning into a piece of garbage before my eyes, and challenged her love for me, claiming she now loved me like a pet rather than a man. I accused her of being in love with the other woman, pointing out that I had fallen to second place. When she denied it, I yelled at her to stop, asserting that I knew what I saw and knew her better than anyone else. She looked guilty, and it dawned on her that I had seen them together. Despite her quick attempt to salvage the situation, I argued that it didn't change the fact that she loved someone else instead of me. I expressed the sentiment that everything might have been different if it were another man. At least then, I could confront him. She asked if we could be civil, to which I responded uncertainly, acknowledging the painful truth that she had fallen in love with a woman who had become her mistress, ultimately stealing my wife. A few months later, I learned that the children knew nothing about Tracy's affair. They thought that Aunt Kate was just a close friend of Mom's. They had both seen the occasional quick kiss and gentle touch. But since Aunt Kate wasn't a man, they didn't think there was anything inappropriate. I found out about this one night when the kids and I went out to dinner, and the kids mentioned that Kate had been spending more time in the house since I moved in. They seemed to have figured out that Aunt Kate was one of the reasons Tracy and I were getting a divorce. Since we live in a no-fault divorce state, our finances were pretty much split down the middle. I had to pay her child support. She got the house until the kids went to college, and of course, I had to pay child support. I moved into an apartment about 15 minutes from my old home. I was completely crushed. Tracy and I kept in touch through the girls. They were involved in all sorts of activities, both in and out of school, and Tracy and I tried our best to show them that we were going to support them as much as possible. I don't know why, but Tracy fought hard with the divorce, and it dragged on for a year before we finally did it. I was polite, nothing more, when I ran into Tracy and Kate at my daughter's parties. As for family events, I was always invited. But knowing that Tracy would be there, I apologized and escaped for forgiveness. I know I was giving up some wonderful family memories, but it took everything I had to keep my composure when she and Kate were around. I did a solo day for the kids to give them birthday and Christmas gifts. As you might expect, each of us retained the friends we had before we got married. Almost all the friends we made after we got married stayed with Tracy. As one of the husbands explained to me, many of them felt awkward around me, given that I had lost my wife to a woman. The consensus seemed to be that I somehow deserved it, and several of our married women friends almost made just that claim. I let them go without a fight because, as the old saying goes, you learn who your real friends are under adverse conditions. By my own choice, I didn't date much for the next few years. My heart certainly wasn't ready for this, and I didn't need much communication. After a year of being alone, I went to the local animal shelter and adopted a German Shepherd who was probably about 3 years old. I actually went to the shelter and asked them to show me the 3 dogs that had been there the longest. The one I chose had been there since he was a frisky puppy, but after being rejected repeatedly, he turned into a quiet, reclusive animal with the saddest pair of eyes I've ever seen on an animal. I felt like we were soulmates because we were both rejected. The dog's name was Bob. Not some cute animal name or something named after a cute Disney character, just Bob. Bob caught me, and I caught Bob. The first thing he did when I brought him into my apartment after sniffing around was to climb onto the couch next to me and curl up next to me. He was good with the girls when I had them over on the weekends, but I think Bob liked it best when it was just us guys. He loved to walk or ride with me, and we could talk about almost any topic. Admittedly, Bob was mostly silent during these conversations, but I knew from the look on his face and ears that he was paying attention to everything I said. A few years later, my oldest daughter, Lisa, met a guy from Boston in college and got married. Since I was doing pretty well in my engineering career, I could afford to give her the wedding of her dreams. I couldn't have been more proud of her as I walked her down the aisle. But after the service, I earned a reprimand from her for ruining my one line. I realized this right during the rehearsal, but under the pressure of the real situation, my voice cracked. Coming to my senses, I responded to the question of who was marrying Tracy off with a simple "I" instead of the correct "her mother and I." I admitted to almost choking on my words. Taking my seat in the front row beside Tracy, she leaned towards me and quietly remarked that it was disgusting, and I knew it. Kate, seated next to Tracy, leaned forward and audaciously glared at me. I discreetly told her to forget it with just my lips, checking if the pastor noticed our exchange. Wedding ceremonies always bring back memories for me, and at first, I looked back on my wedding day fondly. This memory lasted about 30 seconds before I mentally pictured Tracy and Kate together in the restaurant when I found out about them. When I awoke from my reverie, Tracy was looking at me sadly. She blushed and quickly looked away. I guess I wasn't the only one taking a walk down memory lane. Although I didn't try to watch, I noticed that Tracy and Kate seemed to be having a great time together with Lisa and her new husband Jerry and almost everyone else. It was then that I noticed I was one of the few single people over 50 in the room. Feeling sorry for myself, I went to the open bar and ordered a shot of 18-year-old Irish whiskey. Taking my glass, I sat down at my table and quietly patted myself on the back for hosting such a grand event. 3 years later, I was about to play the father of the bride again when my youngest, Ariel, had her beau walk her down the aisle. This time, I decided not to go it alone and finally made a concerted effort to meet people. Returning home from a 3-day trip out of state 3 weeks later, I stopped at a small bar restaurant about an hour from my apartment. Though I usually avoid such bars due to my dislike of country western music, they were advertising pork BBQ, so I had to stop. The food was great, and as the DJ started playing music around 8 p.m., I looked around in case there might be someone worth chatting with, so to speak. Just then, a 30-year-old black woman with the face of an angel walked through the door. She was absolutely gorgeous, and I wondered why an unmarried young black woman was at the bar at this time. On the other hand, there I was, the lonely old white guy. I knew she was probably too young for me, but damn it. I motioned to the bartender to put everything she drank on my tab. He told her that her drink was paid for and gestured in my direction. She walked over to my table to thank me, and I invited her to sit down. To my surprise, she sat down next to me and introduced herself as Jade. During a pleasant evening, she suggested going to her place, catching me off guard. Without hesitation, we headed towards the door when a man in a cowboy hat approached Jade and lightly kissed her cheek. I halted abruptly, and Jade reassured me, introducing him as her husband, Fred. She asked if he could join and have a look, to which Fred grinned and mentioned their involvement. I expressed my discomfort, stating there was something wrong with the situation and the messed-up generation. I raised my hands, signaling them to stop, and left alone to my car. In another attempt to find companionship, I turned to my church. Carrie, a 50-year-old divorcee with long black hair, 34B chest, long legs, and a big smile, and I got along well. After a few dates, we went back to my apartment, leading to closeness. However, during the encounter, she began muttering her ex-husband Jim's name. The situation escalated as she screamed it during subsequent climaxes. I stopped immediately, explaining that I wasn't Jim. In response, she expressed genuine anger and questioned why I had stopped. In silence, I drove her home, and needless to say, there was no fifth date. For my next dating venture, I invited a coworker over for an evening of food and dancing. Allison Webb, a vivacious 42-year-old divorcee who had separated from her husband almost 5 years ago, was a blonde with slightly larger chest and a bump than someone of average proportions. We had been friends at work for about 10 years, and by this point, she had heard my sad story, and I had heard hers. Our great evening turned into several wonderful evenings, and we genuinely enjoyed each other's company even before our first time being make love. Looking forward to a great time at the wedding, I invited Allison to be my date. She responded seriously, expressing uncertainty about accompanying me to my daughter's wedding, considering the family dynamics with my ex-wife. I mentioned that she would need the green light from Bob, my wingman, a 45-pound German Shepherd mix with sophisticated taste. I explained that if Bob didn't like her, he wouldn't accompany me to the wedding. She found this peculiar and labeled me a strange person. After passing Bob's test the following week, Allison agreed to be my wedding date, bringing joy to the girls who were happy I wouldn't be attending solo. Tracy, however, appeared displeased with this arrangement, consistently giving me disgruntled looks. Since I didn't engage much with her, I disregarded her opinion. However, it bothered Allison, who sensed Tracy's dislike for her. At the rehearsal dinner, I found Tracy alone and finally confronted her, asking about her problem. Tracy responded with sarcasm, expressing disdain for Allison and questioning if I was now dating Girl Scouts. I noted that Tracy's jealousy didn't look good on her, reminding her that Allison, Tracy, and Kate were the same age. I playfully remarked that Tracy had traded me for a younger female version, and she responded with shy grace. A year later, Allison became my second wife, and life went on. Truthfully, I had completely forgotten that I was on the bone marrow registry when I got a call one day at work and was told that after 30 years, I was a match for someone. Thrilled at the opportunity to help save someone's life, I knew the bone marrow extraction would be somewhat inconvenient, but my hero complex made me more than willing to undergo the procedure. Further testing was required, and if it was favorable, the extraction would be scheduled for 2 weeks. After granting my consent, I told them I was on board. While not very religious, I believe in God, and there's an old saying that God works in mysterious ways. I never thought about it until 4 days later when I spoke on the phone with my oldest daughter, Lisa, during our weekly conversation. Ariel and I avoid discussing Tracy's life, but Lisa mentioned that bone marrow had been found for Aunt Kate, and they were actively involved. Through Lisa, I conveyed my best wishes to Kate and Tracy, expressing that despite the pain caused by their actions, I didn't wish them damage. Lisa warned that as an adult, I could call them myself. I acknowledged this, but explained that the less I talked to them, the less likely I was to say something unpleasant that I might regret later. Lisa encouraged me to come to terms with the divorce, highlighting that I've been happily married to Allison for almost 2 years. Acknowledging my happiness, I shared that while I no longer hated Tracy, she wasn't on my Facebook friends list. I decided to send Tracy flowers with a card of good wishes. Later, as I ordered the bouquet, a thought struck me. Bone marrow matches are rare, and the coincidence of Kate finding a match around the same time as me seemed too convenient. Aware of the anonymity in the donation process, I contacted my registry contact, pretending to be optimistic, and inquired about the likelihood of my match living in the same city. She stuttered and admitted it was the first time someone had identified their match. Frustrated, I realized I was going to donate bone marrow to Tracy. Angered by the situation, I reflected on how she stole my wife, never apologized, and now expected me to save her life through a bone marrow donation. I determined it wouldn't happen. 2 days later, I called my receptionist back and said I was refusing to make the donation. She almost burst into tears, and when she came to her senses, she asked me if there was any specific reason why I backed down. She explained that although I had the right to refuse, this was almost never done and would cause great consternation at the registry. I apologized for causing horror, but told her it was in my own best interest to refuse. She muttered that she was sorry and told me that if I changed my mind in the very near future, I should call her. Allison was furious when I told her I had turned down the donation. I didn't tell her that I found out who the donation was supposed to go to. She just knew that I had abandoned the obligation to possibly save someone's life. My wife expressed her frustration, practically screaming at me, questioning why, after expressing the desire to help, I now wanted to ruin someone's life. It was the first time I heard Allison use strong language, and I decided to be honest with her, explaining that I wouldn't have informed my ex-wife or Kate about the donation if I had a choice. She was unimpressed by my reasoning, accusing me of denying Kate a chance at life for revenge. I clarified that it wasn't revenge, emphasizing my efforts to have as little in common with my ex-wife and Kate as possible since they both hurt me. Allison questioned if they knew about her involvement, and I assured her that everything was done anonymously, and I only found out about it by luck. As I shared this, Allison's expression softened. She argued that I couldn't refuse the opportunity to save someone's life, emphasizing the weight of holding Kate's life in my hands. She whispered that I was too nice a guy to withhold help, and that the guilt would eventually consume me. I disagreed, stating that I wouldn't feel guilty as Kate and Tracy had broken my heart. I emphasized that they would never know it was me. Allison expressed concern, mentioning the hope they had and how my decision might have ruined it for them. Allison and I continued to have disagreements, and it felt like we were growing apart as a couple. Our differences seemed more pronounced than ever. At one point, she asked about my Christian charity, to which I responded by questioning whether I should blindly give money to someone who might damage me. She called me ridiculous in response. I explained that they hadn't torn out my heart and turned my world upside down like they did to me. I expressed my reluctance to simply shrug off the pain and help them after 17 years. I reminded her that Tracy had been married to Kate longer than to her and suggested she deal with it. Allison insisted they had made a decision, and I replied quietly that they could live or not, indifferent to their fate. A few days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I left the room, informing Allison that I was going to the range to blow off some steam. She reminded me to be back before dinner as the girls were coming and didn't want me to smell like gunpowder, instructing me to take a shower before we ate. I knocked the living crap out of the target with 500 rounds from my 9mm Whitefish. I can't explain why, but shooting always relaxes me. I think it's because you have to really concentrate on what you're doing, and when you stop concentrating so hard, your body goes into a relaxed mode. At least that's my thought, and I stand by it. I definitely smelled like gunpowder when I got home. So when I got home, I quickly headed to the shower. I glanced at the dining table. There was set for 6 people, and from the smell, Allison was cooking a roast. She is a great cook, and I was hoping she would make these little brown potatoes instead of mashed potatoes. After taking a shower, I poured myself a glass of rye whiskey and brought Ellie a glass of wine. She seemed a little nervous, which I put down to her wanting the dinner to be perfect for the girls and their husbands. I kissed her on the lips. I was sitting in the living room reading on the computer when the door opened and the girls came in, not accompanied by their husbands, but by Tracy and a shabby-looking Kate. I wasn't happy to see any of them, and I shot Allison a glare as I stood up to greet everyone. I kissed both girls, but didn't say anything to my ex or Kate. I noticed that they greeted Allison with what could be called enthusiasm. There seemed to be a lot of whispering around. Not having been born yesterday, I immediately knew that Allison had orchestrated this little intervention. I was more inclined to think of it as an ambush, since apparently I was the only one unaware of the meeting. I thought about just taking my phone and leaving, but then I decided it was time for me to speak up. At first, however, I had to endure the excuse that it was just a nice meal with family and friends. Kate's illness was the main topic of conversation at the table, although I took no part in it. Sitting with what I thought was a thoughtful expression on my face, I suppose dinner and dessert were good. I really couldn't tell. Being the good host, I provided everyone with their afternoon drinks, and we moved into the living room. After a moment of silence, I decided it was time to express my thoughts. I questioned who would speak first: the woman who had betrayed my trust to arrange the meeting, the woman who had broken my heart years ago but now believed I owed her a favor, or perhaps the woman who had taken a married woman from her unsuspecting, loving husband and now needed help for a chance at life. As I made my statement, I looked at each face in turn, and none of the women could meet my gaze. Allison seemed excited when I called her name, and my eldest daughter, Lisa, took the initiative to speak. She acknowledged my lingering anger towards Mom and Aunt Kate, but criticized my refusal to donate bone marrow as childish and petty, stating it was beneath me. Lisa argued that seeking revenge by denying someone a chance at life was wrong, emphasizing that it involved a person's life, not a frivolous act like hitting someone with a whipped cake. I took a sip of rye whiskey and cleared my throat, shaking my head slightly. I expressed my anger and stated that every action in life has consequences. I noted that Tracy and Kate never expected such severe consequences, but were now trying to make their problem mine. I highlighted the unexpected opportunity to make a difference in the life of someone who had wronged me. Despite their belief that it was driven by revenge, I suggested it might also be a way for me to regain some self-respect. After all, how much self-respect could I have if I helped the man who stole my wife survive? And I don't think any of you even consider the fact that you think I should be easier on Kate because she's a woman. If her name was Carl and he was a 200-pound man, most of you would probably think that I would be right about what I do. But it doesn't matter to me that Kate is a woman. She's a wife-stealing cow. She knew what she was doing was wrong. Kate attempted to convey her feelings by staring intensely at the carpet. Seated beside her on the couch, Tracy reached over and gently squeezed Kate's hand. I asserted that my decision was not driven by revenge, but by hatred towards Kate. I expressed that I despised her, harboring no intention of assisting her in any situation. I highlighted my minimal communication with her during the 17 years she was with Tracy. Tracy sniffled, holding back tears, and questioned whether I hated her to the extent that I would deprive someone else of a chance to live. She appealed to my past love for her, suggesting that considering it a noble thing to do would be a matter of honor. I retorted, expressing skepticism about Tracy's notion of honor, calling her a fancy woman, and stating that she had no right to lecture me on what honor is. My volume level rose, and I tried my best not to tell them all, including Allison, to burn in hell and leave me alone. I took a couple of deep breaths, and Allison apparently decided that I wasn't angry enough with her. She quietly told me that I'm a good person and always do the right thing, emphasizing that retreating is wrong and that I would never be able to live with myself if I did that. Lisa interjected, reminding me that I taught Ariel and her to always do the right thing, even if it seems wrong. Acknowledging this, I asserted that my decision was for me, to avoid any regrets or loss of sleep. Kate suddenly exclaimed, pleading with me not to let her die. Despite acknowledging the offense I felt, she appealed to the grim reality of her situation, mentioning the slim chances of survival unless I donated my bone marrow. Kate's eyes looked haunted. Asking me to help save her life must have been the hardest thing she's ever done. I looked deep into those haunted eyes. I did not feel the joy of confirming my decision, but I confirmed it. No, that's all, I said. I didn't say the phrase, I'm sorry, because frankly, I wasn't sorry. I won't do anything in my power to help this woman. Kate took my answer better than Tracy, who burst into tears. Allison walked over to the couple to calm them down, and I heard her whisper, I'll try. I'll talk to him. She was so caught up in the moment that Allison never realized that she had put our marriage in jeopardy. I will have to think long and hard about whether I can bridge the gap in our trust. I grabbed the car keys from the key ring where they were located. I walked out the door while 5 women cried. I didn't return for 3 days. I didn't answer any of the dozens of phone calls from Allison or the kids. The house was dark. I quickly looked around and decided that Allison had stopped somewhere else for the time being. A suitcase and some clothes were missing, but almost everything else was left untouched. I also grabbed my suitcase and packed a few things, taking most of my clothes and most of my belongings with me. I left my wedding ring in the middle of the kitchen table. 3 days later at work, I received an anonymous call that turned out to be Allison. She expressed disbelief that our relationship was ending because I refused to be what she considered the biggest idiot in the world. I responded by expressing my astonishment at being married to someone who had completely violated my trust. I suggested that both of us could fix the situation, and if anyone was seeking revenge, it wasn't me, but perhaps a higher power. I referenced the biblical saying, "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord." I criticized her for her actions and remarked that she really sucked. Kate passed away 2 months after our official divorce, and I learned about it through the local newspaper obituary. I hadn't followed her case, and none of my daughters kept me informed. Despite the estrangement from my daughters after the confrontation, I stood firm in my belief and stance of not helping Kate, and neither I nor my girls backed down. My decision was the right one for me. I never lost a minute of sleep over not giving Kate my bone marrow. The people at the bone marrow registry were not very understanding of my individual situation and completely crossed me off the list. I was fine with this because the likelihood of me getting a second match was extremely unlikely. Bob was a bit moody and not exactly thrilled with any of the women I'd brought home over the past year or so. But that was okay, because at 62, I wasn't really looking for wife number 3. Somewhat surprisingly, I was still getting my share of good closeness. I learned that at that age, eligible women outnumbered eligible men about 4 to 1. And if her health was good, there was a good chance my girlfriend was ready for a roll in the hay for the evening. Of course, we couldn't frolic with too much youth. After all, neither of us wanted to break a hip. But more often than not, we both enjoyed a nice roll in the hay. I jokingly called my ladies my handsome old singletons. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family for over 4 years. When my youngest Ariel called to tell me that Tracy had died a few days ago, she thought I should know and invited me to the funeral. We had 15 good years together and had 2 kids, so I figured I should at least show up. Maybe I can improve my relationship with the girls. I sat in the back alone. It was a good ceremony. After the funeral, I approached the girls and their families. I received shy hugs from the girls, firm handshakes from their husbands, and shy greetings from my 3 grandchildren. We went to a nearby restaurant to talk. About 3 minutes passed before the first salvo was fired. This came from Lisa. She abruptly questioned why Aunt Kate was allowed to die, and I responded, noting the unchanged nature of the conversation after 4 years. Referring to Kate as a wife thief, I asserted that it would be the final discussion on the matter. Changing the topic, I pointed out a young man at the bar, suggesting a hypothetical scenario where he kissed Lisa. Jerry expressed without hesitation that he would damage him, and when asked about a potential affair, he stated the man would already be dead. I drew a parallel, mentioning that since he would be dead, Jerry wouldn't have to worry about donating bone marrow if he fell sick. Jerry agreed, and I clarified that I didn't save Kate's life, partly due to her being a woman, which may have been a mistake. I asserted that I shouldn't have saved the life of the man involved with my wife or the one who stole it. Jerry agreed with the realization dawning on him, and he looked around the room, observing understanding gradually light up in each pair of eyes. I quietly shared that I wasn't proud of my decision, but not ashamed either, explaining that Kate didn't deserve my compassion for stealing the love of my life. Ariel questioned how I could withhold compassion if I ever loved her mother. I confessed to having loved her mother deeply, but when she broke my heart, much of that love turned to hate. Acknowledging that I was just a man, not the monster portrayed by her mother, I expressed that things didn't turn out well for her mother, and karma eventually caught up with her and her friend. Tears filled the eyes of the other 4 adults in the room, while the children looked confused and worried. I recognized that it would take time for all of us to come to terms with the situation and suggested that we not dwell on the past as life goes on.
Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now let's dive into today's story. Liam, 36. A successful software engineer who's worked hard to achieve his current life. Thoughtful and analytical, he trusts deeply. Never imagining betrayal could disrupt his carefully planned world. Ava, 34. A creative soul with a captivating personality, Ava has been working on her literary dreams for years. Her passion for storytelling is matched by her charm, which has always made her the center of attention in social circles. Mr. Tucker, 50s. The landlord, who owns the charming historic building they live in, is known for his charisma and approachable demeanor. Behind this facade, he's a cunning man who knows how to manipulate people's emotions and vulnerabilities to get what he wants. Liam and Eva's marriage is built on what he thought was a foundation of trust and love. While he often has to work long hours, he prides himself on the life they've built together. He supports her literary dreams, giving her the time and space to focus on her writing. Little does he know that his sacrifices are silently building a betrayal that will shake him to his core. Over the months, Liam starts noticing subtle changes in Ava's behavior. She's more distant, less affectionate, and often preoccupied. She claims it's due to her writing and finding her voice as an author, a reason he initially believes. One evening, as Liam returns from work, he sees Eva walking up the stairs with Mr. Tucker, laughing about something she brushes off when Liam asks. "Oh, it's just about the building renovations," she says with an innocent smile. But Liam can't ignore the growing feeling in his gut. The ease with which she dismisses his questions and the guarded look in her eyes begin to fuel his suspicion. His suspicion grows further when Ava begins dressing up more frequently, using reasons like meeting with a writing group or doing research for her novel. The mounting inconsistencies become harder for Liam to brush aside. Every time she leaves, a nagging thought gnaws at him. Is she hiding something? One evening, while sorting through some mail on the kitchen counter, Liam finds an envelope with Ava's name on it. It's unmarked, with no sender address, but curiosity gets the better of him, and he opens it. Inside are two things that send a cold shiver down his spine. A hotel receipt for a recent overnight stay and a handwritten note signed by Mr. Tucker. It reads, "Can't wait for our next writing session, my love." His mind reels, heart pounding. He rereads the note, each word a hammer blow to his chest. He grapples with the realization that Eva's writing sessions were a guise for a hidden affair with the very man who owns the building they live in. Shaken, Liam spends days replaying past moments in his mind, scrutinizing every interaction for clues he may have missed. Determined not to confront her in anger, he decides to wait, biding his time to confront her in a way that will leave no room for her lies. He begins collecting evidence, building a silent case against her betrayal. Each night, as Ava sleeps, he examines her phone, her emails, and the few text exchanges she hasn't deleted. The evidence stacks up: flirtatious messages, photos, and the regular arrangements they made under the pretense of writing sessions. His emotions fluctuate between rage, heartbreak, and a need for justice. But instead of exploding, he nurtures a plan to dismantle something even more dear to her than their marriage. On a rainy night, as thunder rumbles in the background, Liam sits in their dimly lit living room, waiting for Eva to return. She arrives late, her smile faltering when she sees him awake, the intense expression on his face unnerving her. "Ava," he says, barely able to contain the fury in his voice. "We need to talk." She hesitates, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Sure, Liam. What's going on?" Liam pulls out the hotel receipts and printed copies of the messages he uncovered. He lays them on the coffee table, each piece of evidence a nail in the coffin of their relationship. "Care to explain?" he asks, his voice cold and measured. Ava's face pales as she scans the evidence. "Liam, it's not what it looks like. Please, I can explain." Her voice trembles and she stumbles over her words, offering excuses, blaming her vulnerability, and begging for his forgiveness. She even goes as far as to say Mr. Tucker manipulated her, that she felt lost and needed comfort. But Liam is unmoved. He calmly listens to her pleas, taking in every word while masking his own heartbreak. Then, with steely resolve, he tells her, "Ava, I don't want your excuses. You've made your choice, and now you'll face the consequences." Liam knows Ava's literary ambitions are her deepest passion. For years, she's worked on a novel, pouring her soul into every page. It's her dream, her escape, the one part of herself she values above all else. And so, he devises his revenge. Feigning acceptance, Liam gives Ava a few days to believe they're moving past the affair. She throws herself into her writing, relieved, thinking she still has her marriage and her literary dream. One evening, when she's out, Liam sits at her desk, opens her computer, and locates her manuscript. With a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow, he transfers it to a USB drive and deletes the original from her computer, ensuring no backups remain. To make sure her literary dream is thoroughly crushed, he also sends her publisher a note, posing as Eva, withdrawing her submission, saying, "I've decided to abandon my writing career." The thought of what this will do to her strikes a hollow satisfaction in his heart. The following day, Ava logs into her laptop, ready to continue her novel, only to find every trace of her work gone. Panic consumes her as she frantically searches through every file, folder, and document, only to realize her life's work has vanished. In desperation, she confronts Liam, tears streaming down her face. "Liam, please tell me you didn't delete it. That's my life's work. I've spent years on it." She sobs, crumpling to the floor. Liam stands over her, watching the impact of his actions sink in. He speaks slowly, each word cutting into her. "I didn't destroy your novel, Eva. You did that the moment you chose to betray me. You destroyed our marriage, and now you've lost something you love just as much." In the days that follow, Ava falls into despair, struggling to come to terms with the consequences of her betrayal. She becomes a shell of her former self, her dream of becoming a published author now shattered. Meanwhile, Liam decides to move on, having cleansed himself of the pain she caused. The two of them go their separate ways, haunted by the memories and choices they made. For Liam, the satisfaction of reclaiming control over his life comes with the bittersweet realization that, despite his revenge, he still has wounds that need healing. And so Liam turned his pain into a lesson for Eva, leaving her with the loss of her own dreams. Thank you for watching this story of betrayal, heartbreak, and justice. We hope it kept you on the edge of your seat. Please let us know in the comments. Would you have done what Liam did? Or would you have handled it differently? Remember to like, share, and subscribe to support our channel for more intense stories like this. Thanks for watching.
The bridge, not long or wide, is a simple wooden structure that spans the narrow yet profound gap between past disappointments and future uncertainties. Let me introduce myself. I'm Lyle Jetterman, now 38, a man who previously only differed from others in that he was the husband of 36-year-old Gloria and the father of 12-year-old Robert and 8-year-old Anna. It's a pleasant family picture, albeit with a significant financial burden. To meet my duties as a husband and father, I worked at Countryman Realtor for 5 years before Gabriel Zelo bought the company from Bernie Schleifer. Real estate wasn't my first career choice, or even my desired one. I started my career after graduating from law school. At that time, I had been married to Gloria for 3 years, and she was pregnant when I graduated. The job market for young lawyers wasn't very promising, but Gloria's pregnancy gave me a strong incentive to find a job that could support my family. The initial job I secured was at a law firm specializing in representing banks during home loan closings. It wasn't the career I had envisioned, but it was employment. While I pursued my law degree, Gloria worked as a bank teller to support us both. Her earnings covered rent and necessities, while I worked part-time jobs to supplement our income. My education was funded through loans and scholarships, but I aimed for a future with the Department of Education. Since Gloria became pregnant around my law school graduation, I accepted the job offer, marking the first of many compromises in married life. In those bygone days, banks extended loans to individual homebuyers for house purchases, a profession considered genteel for lawyers. I sat at the desk handling house-flipping transactions on behalf of lending institutions. During mortgage closings, buyers paid the bank a commission of roughly $500 for my services. The law firm received this sum along with an additional $500 from the insurance company. Each successful closing meant earning a solid $1,000 when we sealed the deal. Naturally, the firm profited, and I received a small portion as my salary. It seems all good things must end, and honorable frugality gives way to insatiable greed. Shortly after my wife Gloria gave birth to our second child, the consolidation of small banks into larger ones, which were then absorbed by even bigger ones, reshaped the banking landscape. Retail loans became obsolete as banking transitioned into a wholesale trade, operating at an industrial scale. Each morning, I'd confront a stack of mortgage paperwork at work, slated for same-day closings. While profits likely soared, the frenetic pace of simultaneous house closings left me with an uneasy feeling about the sustainability of this model. Over my 7-year legal career, I didn't advance to partnership, but ascended to the esteemed status of a private contractor, earning $75 per closing. With 7 or 8 loans closed daily, 5, and sometimes 6 days a week, my income was respectable. However, I harbored doubts about the longevity of this arrangement, sensing an impending downturn. Bernard Schliefer, or Bernie as he preferred, approached me. Seeking a legally savvy individual, Bernie aimed to expand his company, Countryman Real Estate. With his main contract transitioning to the Sunbelt, Bernie eyed growth. His company held shares in the Scarlet Woods development, boasting 100 approved lots with plans for 400 more. Strategically located 2 miles from a tech park with 2,000 high-tech jobs on the horizon, Bernie, a builder-developer, excelled at securing financing for growth projects. However, he struggled to market to homeowners seeking upgrades or adjustable-rate mortgages. Strangely enough, when Bernie and I first met, everything clicked. I thrived on selling houses and paid close attention to details, especially when it came to managing the flurry of paperwork involved in transactions. Drawing from lessons learned from previous employers, I implemented profit center strategies, boosting Bernie's sales by leveraging partnerships with home insurance agents, movers, gardeners, and more. We swiftly evolved into a comprehensive agency with one goal: maximizing home sales and capitalizing on associated services. Bernie wasted no time in initiating construction projects, while I diligently managed day-to-day operations. He handled major deals, while I took care of smaller ones, earning a handsome salary as his trusted employee. Bernie foresaw the impending crisis. Bear Stearns served as a precursor, but the collapse of investment bank Lehman Brothers was the catalyst. Despite the looming catastrophe, Bernie remained optimistic, believing in real estate's inherent resilience. While the market plummeted, Bernie remained unfazed, confident in its eventual rebound. I focused on maximizing every opportunity, channeling profits into larger and more lucrative rural properties as part of Bernie's investment strategy. Bernie had only one concern. He felt like a significant figure in a small arena and desired to dive into the vast ocean. One evening, during drinks after work, he dropped the bombshell. "I've sold everything." "What? Take it easy. The new owner won't shake things up, at least not right away." Once again, Bernie proved correct. Upon meeting Gabe Zello, my initial impression was of his youthfulness. Not yet 30, he orchestrated Bernie's buyout. Taller and younger than me, Gabe possessed a striking, blonde-haired, Adonis-like appearance, embodying the epitome of a business prodigy superstar. Though I should have felt envy toward the young man, his charm and amiability made it difficult to be resentful. Working for him proved enjoyable as well. Approaching 50, Bernie was ambitious, yet fundamentally cautious. In contrast, Gabe thrived on transparency and risk-taking. He operated with everything laid bare for all to see, always pushing the boundaries. It became evident early on that his investment in a rural property had stretched his finances thin. Gabe leaned more toward financing than construction, and leaned more into management than salesmanship. He relished in quick profits, and when the real estate market rebounded, his wager on Countryman Real Estate clearly paid off. Meanwhile, Bernie headed to Florida, drawn to the allure of a large real estate venture. The night before his departure, I wished him luck. "Come with me, baby," he said. "No, I'm not a child anymore. I have a wife and 2 teenagers to support," I replied. "Okay, but someday you'll regret it." I hoped not, but I checked the job market. There's not much left of my old company. Stephen Pender, one of the junior partners, managed to weather the collapse. He was glad to hear from me, but offered only a third of my current earnings, so I worked diligently to ensure Countryman Real Estate stayed afloat. Overall, I was content working for Gabe, as we called him. He treated me well and allowed me to manage the office day to day. Did I have any doubts about him? Yes, but my only grievance with the boss was minor. Bernie never hosted a formal Christmas party, but Gabe took it to the opposite extreme. He rented one of the finest vacation spots in Saratoga, albeit during the off-season, for a hefty sum. The next party, held on the first Saturday in December, was for staff, contractors, bankers, and realtors. It was a lavish affair with a large guest list. Gabe spared no expense. Well, it was his money, and perhaps there was a legitimate business rationale behind it all. My discontent began around midnight and intensified throughout the night. You see, I arrived with the most attractive woman in the venue on my arm. I married Gloria right after college when we were both barely 22. While I was in law school, she worked a dead-end job to support us. I'll always be grateful to her for that, but she became pregnant by stopping birth control while I studied for the bar exam. In hindsight, the pregnancy may have been for the best. We've been good parents then and still are now. While I struggled with renting houses, Gloria raised our kids and worked nights to earn her doctorate in child psychology. When our youngest child started school, Gloria returned to work, landing a job at the State Department. She also embarked on what I now call her running career. Gloria could be described as chubby, especially compared to some undernourished models. But at 30, she transitioned from swimming at the YWCA pool twice a week and jogging occasionally to running long distances solo every morning. She started waking early to trek 5 miles cross-country. Each evening, she dedicated half an hour to sprinting. She held the fastest time among local female runners and was only surpassed once by national competitors in local 5K and 10K races. She even participated in the New York City Marathon 3 times, ranking among the top 100 women finishers. I'm not a stay-at-home type. I hit the gym at least 3 times a week and bike 20 miles on summer weekends. However, with over 5% body fat, I don't boast a physique sculpted by Michelangelo. I stood by Gloria in her endeavors, witnessing her early morning routines and returning sweaty as I woke the children. I felt proud of my wife, so when I entered the Christmas party with this tall, dark-haired beauty on my arm, conversations hushed and heads turned to behold the striking Gloria. Standing just over 6 feet tall in her 3-inch heels, she matched my height perfectly. Her raven locks cascaded over her shoulders, shimmering in the ballroom lamplight that evening. Despite her efforts to attend the party, Gloria wore a new form-fitting black dress. The scallop-trimmed attire hinted at her cleavage and was daringly short, showcasing her fabulously long runner's legs. This dress accentuated her flat stomach and sculpted rear, drawing admiring gazes. No longer a chubby girl, my wife exuded confidence as a remarkable woman. In Gabe's arms, she wasted no time in greeting us and joining him for a dance. Although I couldn't deny they made a lovely couple, his attentiveness seemed to border on inappropriate. Shortly before midnight, he approached her and kissed her passionately beneath the mistletoe. While I wasn't jealous, yes, my wife was attractive, but I trusted her. We had weathered many hardships together. From years of law school to raising children and paying off school loans, we had overcome illness and feticide. I felt sorry for couples who hadn't faced such trials together. It's adversity that strengthens a marriage. Gloria and I had faced everything together and remained deeply in love. As Gloria reveled in the attention while drinking, I dismissed it all as the result of the festive atmosphere. I escorted my wife home, and we didn't discuss the incident further. It was just an effect of too much hard drinks, I reassured myself. 6 months later, Memorial Day weekend rolled around, marking the halfway point of the year, which had been favorable for the real estate sector with a notable increase in clients. The final week of May experienced record-breaking heat, setting the hottest temperatures in the past decade. The company's operating account brimmed with cash from home sales, scheduled for deposit on the first business day of June. We planned to review the checks and electronically pay the banks when the office reopened after the 3-day weekend. "Are you joining us for the weekend camping trip?" Gabe inquired. He had rented a mountain cabin in the Adirondacks for Memorial Day weekend and had been talking about it incessantly for weeks. Though his invitation extended to Gloria and me, I was hesitant. "I'm not sure what Gloria's plans are," I replied, attempting to decline politely. "Oh, she's coming. She's looking forward to it," Gabe insisted confidently. I regarded him with uncertainty. "We discussed it on the phone," he added hastily. Why did I doubt him? Nevertheless, after he departed, I called Gloria, and indeed, she was enthusiastic about the trip. Reflecting on it now, I realized that this was the pivotal moment to avert disaster, but I failed to recognize it. I loved Gloria deeply and trusted her implicitly. According to MapQuest, the journey to Gabe's house would be challenging. I traded my Honda Accord for a 4-wheel drive SUV at the rental place. The last 20 miles of the route were along mountain roads, with the final 3 miles on dirt tracks. Having visited the Adirondack Mountains before, I knew firsthand their rugged nature. Gabe's residence lay southwest of Saranac Lake, and the journey took nearly 4 hours. The GPS guided us for the last 5 miles, leading us off the beltway onto the final 2 miles of semi-paved road that terminated at a sturdy wooden bridge. Though narrow, the recently renovated bridge spanned a ravine. While not excessively wide, the gap was deep, characteristic of the terrain typical of the Adirondack Mountains. It's such challenging terrain that preserves their untamed wilderness. I traversed the bridge cautiously, contemplating if there might be another route available. Despite the absence of an alternate exit on the GPS map, I felt like a mouse ensnared in a trap, wondering if there might be a lurking carnivore nearby. 3 miles along a rugged dirt road, we arrived at a 2-story house nestled on a clearing on the mountainside, roughly 1,000 feet below the summit. A dozen Adirondack peaks loomed to the north, providing a picturesque backdrop to this remote location where what appeared to be a rustic cabin had been erected. I parked the SUV in a meticulously maintained parking lot adjacent to 3 similarly upscale vehicles. Everything appeared pristine and meticulously tended to. The cabin itself exemplified the modern log-building aesthetic that evoked rustic charm while boasting contemporary comforts. Adorned in a fusion of modern and traditional paneling, it exuded the ambiance of a 19th-century mountain retreat, albeit with modern conveniences. It was evident that Gabe had spared no expense to create this illusion. I had little doubt about his intended audience for such ostentation, and it certainly wasn't me. We were welcomed on the expansive porch adorned with Adirondack chairs and rustic decor by a group of 6 individuals. Among them were 3 young men, Gabe, and 2 of his college acquaintances. Ken Lewis, the shortest among them at about 5'10", possessed a muscular physique akin to a weightlifter, nearing his 30s. Though starting to bald like Gabe, Ken's rugged features were accentuated by his muscular frame visible beneath his tight t-shirt and shorts. The second college friend, Glenn Sachs, stood at roughly 6 feet tall, slender with curly blonde hair. He appeared more aesthetically pleasing than Ken, his arms wrapped around a blonde woman introduced as Sharon. Sharon exuded beauty with her voluptuous figure and ample bust, likely in her 30s, possibly older, and noticeably 8 to 10 years Glenn's senior. Standing beside Ken was Robin, a slightly younger woman clearly accompanying him. She possessed a bubbly demeanor, short stature, and a well-endowed physique, with bosom seemingly disproportionate to her petite frame. The final member of the group stood tall with flowing brown hair. She was Paula Henry, one of those individuals often described as beautiful, possessing attractive, yet sharply defined, not entirely feminine features. Her demeanor suggested intelligence, a trait acknowledged by herself and others. Clearly the youngest among the women, she was a schoolmate of the boys. Despite the warm and overly enthusiastic welcome we received, there was an air of peculiarity. Gabe specifically greeted my wife with enthusiasm, while I received a more perfunctory acknowledgement. Meanwhile, his friend Paula regarded me with a scrutinizing gaze, akin to one observing a laboratory specimen before dissection. Dinner arrangements were swiftly made, prompting us to hastily stow our belongings in our designated second-floor bedroom adjacent to Gabe's master suite. Seated in the expansive great hall, serving as a combined living room, dining area, and game room, we indulged in gourmet microwave meals around the grand oak table. Though the food was delectable, it was evident that it came with considerable expense and minimal effort. Wine flowed generously, and I monitored my intake, mindful of my host's persistent attempts to replenish our glasses. Post-dinner, the group congregated around the gas fireplace on the terrace, where potent drinks and herb made an appearance, setting the tone for a weekend characterized by revelry and mild use. As I navigated through the situation with careful inquiry and astute observation, what initially seemed like a typical holiday weekend with my boss, his friends, and their partners took on a more intricate undertone. It soon became apparent that Robin had a fiancé elsewhere, while Sharon was married with 2 children and a husband waiting at home. Infidelity was treated with casual disregard and even humor. Paula remained fixated on me, seemingly detached from the group. Although she appeared to be aligned with Gabe, she showed no offense at his overt flirtation with my wife. Throughout the night, Gabe positioned himself mostly between Gloria and Paula, directing most of his conversation towards Gloria. My attempts to engage Paula were met with polite but distant interest, signaling me to refrain from further interaction. As midnight approached, the guests, still in high spirits, seemed prepared to retire for the night. Yet an unspoken anticipation lingered. Suddenly, Gabe addressed me, acknowledging my probable fatigue from the lengthy drive. "Are you ready for bed, Lyle?" Gloria suggested, to which I jokingly insisted on another drink, offering it to Gabe. Internally, I fumed at Gabe's attempts to seduce my wife, questioning Gloria's behavior throughout the evening. Was she truly enamored with him? It was a night of waiting, but ultimately I emerged victorious. Returning to our designated room, Gloria entered the shower alone, and I refrained from joining her, recognizing the futility. Upon her exit, she sat undressed on the edge of the bed, inviting me to join her. "I want to enjoy this weekend," she expressed, reflecting on our challenging past and acknowledging my unwavering support. "You've been an exceptional partner and parent, sacrificing for my education and nurturing our family. Your dedication has not gone unnoticed. I'm proud to be your wife." I woke to the morning sunlight flooding through the open blinds of the spacious bedroom window. Typically, Gloria rose much earlier than I did for my morning jog, but last night's indulgence in hard drinks and bang had its effects. Rising from bed, I drew the curtains shut and made my way to the compact bathroom with a shower. Despite its size, the bathroom boasted ample amenities. After showering and shaving, I headed downstairs before the others had stirred, opting to explore the surroundings while the house was still quiet. Moving from the main room to a patio featuring a fire pit and built-in outdoor BBQ, I then ventured onto a raised terrace housing a small pool and sauna. Considering the chilly spring climate of these mountains, an open water feature seemed risky, but as I stepped onto the terrace, I discovered the entire area was heated. Solar panels adorned the higher slopes of the mountain, heating both the pool and likely the house. Crossing the terrace, I reached what appeared to be a small barn, devoid of animals but stocked with ATVs, snowmobiles, and gardening tools, including several small tractors. As I passed by, the distant sound of a babbling stream caught my attention. About 20 yards behind a locked barn with a chimney protruding from its roof, I glimpsed through a small window, spotting a generator and fuel tanks. It was evident that meticulous care was taken to ensure the provision of gasoline for recreational vehicles and emergency power through the generator. This location felt like its own secluded universe, evidently prepared for any conceivable scenario. Despite the stream appearing small and shallow, I reconsidered its size when witnessing a fish leap from its waters. "Are you fishing?" came a voice from behind me. Turning, I found Paula standing there. "Not today, but I used to when I had more free time. Seems like this weekend might offer you that chance." "Are you into fishing?" I inquired. "No, like you, I lack the time." "Perhaps we could have breakfast and then take a hike up the mountain. It'd be a shame to come all this way and not reach the summit," she suggested. Paula prepared coffee in the stainless steel maker while the kitchen pantry held microwave-ready breakfast options. Opting for instant oatmeal, I noticed none of the others had yet stirred. They'd likely sleep in. "How about that hike?" she proposed, smiling. With Paula evidently knowing the trail's beginning, she led us straight to it. Initially, the summit didn't seem too far, but an hour later, it felt as distant as when we began. "Are you sure about reaching the top?" I questioned. "Why quit now, old man?" she teased. "I'm just thinking about what the others will say when they find us missing." "Don't worry, I doubt they'll mind." Finally reaching the summit, the sun positioned nearly overhead indicated noon was nearing. The mountain's peak was somewhat underwhelming, with a flat area bordered by rounded edges. 2 weathered wooden benches faced east, offering views of the gatehouse and several distant peaks to the south and east. Though the fog obscured distant vistas, The air felt crisp and pure. Seating herself, Paula appeared content to soak in the view. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "I'd like to rest before heading back down." "No, the old man could use a rest," I responded, prompting a smile from me. "So Glenn is a broker, Ken is a banker, and Gabe is a developer. But despite talking all night, I never found out what you do," I remarked, eyeing her thoughtfully. She seemed to weigh the question, assessing the potential consequences. "I'm an inspector. I work for the government. It's a low-paying and rather dull job," she divulged. "Have you inspected anyone we know?" I inquired. "Not recently. Back in college, it felt like I was always bailing them out, covering for them with angry girlfriends or providing cheat sheets for exams. They were always on the edge. That's what makes them who they are. Extraordinary young people," she explained. "So, is this your job now? Covering for them? What's the point of closing the barn door after the horse is bolted? It won't help you retrieve your horse. Rules just hold things back. It's better if smart people rise to the top and the rest step aside. Ultimately, everyone benefits according to their own merits," I mused. "What about your role this weekend? You didn't attend the party last night," I pointed out. She fell silent, caught off guard by the question. I rose and moved to where I could see the road leading down the mountain. There was only one way out. The way out. Turning back to Paula, I scrutinized her. Had she considered this? The others, I realized in a moment of insight, were entirely oblivious to anything beyond their own physical desires. But was she? Clearly, she was observant. She must see the issue as I did. "I'm just here as the designated sober one. I ensure everything runs smoothly, intervening only if absolutely necessary," she explained. "Meaning, unless the Golden Boys need you," I summarized. "I wouldn't put it like that, but I certainly prioritize what's best for them, for everyone, in the long run," she clarified. "Shall we head downstairs?" I suggested. "What's the rush? The journey back will be quicker," she remarked. "Yes, quicker, but the slope is steep and perhaps more perilous. You could take a nasty fall," I cautioned. "Why worry when you're already at the top?" she retorted, though she rose and began to descend. We returned to the lodge without incident, yet my concerns intensified. Finding the others by the pool, I was taken aback by my wife's appearance in a black bikini, revealing her body in a manner I hadn't seen before. The other women were similarly clad. As Paula and I approached, I witnessed my wife seated on Gabe's lap, engaged in a passionate kiss. "We're back!" Paula's shout interrupted Gabe and Gloria's kiss. Gabe grinned mischievously while Gloria's smile seemed forced. "Where have you two been?" Gloria asked casually, breaking the awkward silence. My fists clenched instinctively, but Paula squeezed my hand. "Well, since we missed lunch and conquered the mountain, we deserve some food," Paula declared, pulling me towards the cabin. As we left the pool area, I heard muted laughter. I wasn't sure what Paula had prepared, and if I ate anything, I couldn't recall. She handed me a glass of straight black Johnny Walker, which burned as it went down. "Think before you act," she advised. "It's just one weekend in a good marriage, and you need to consider your family." Returning to the pool, the couples were already settled in the jacuzzi, laughing and giggling. My wife remained seated on Gabe's lap. I couldn't see their hands underwater, but I assumed they were occupied. A joint was passed around, and it was evident that everyone was intoxicated. Paula positioned herself where she could keep an eye on things, placing herself between the jacuzzi and me. I pretended to drink more before discreetly walking away. Out of sight, I poured out the contents of my glass. It was a strange mix of jealousy and pride. I was proud of my wife's transformation from the chubby girl I married to the beautiful, athletic woman she had become, rightfully desired by others. I took pride in the fact that men longed to be in her loving, strong arms. But what about her inner self as she sculpted her physique? Seeing her with Gabe had an oddly alluring quality. I could picture their flawless bodies entwined physically, a nightmarish yet exhilarating image. I strolled around the lodge grounds, observing its operations, passing time while dreading the direction things seemed to be heading, realizing that ultimately I might need to take control of my options. Entering our bedroom, I made a deliberate attempt to sleep. As I lay there, trying to quiet my mind, the question of why my wife was flirting and kissing another man lingered. We had weathered many hardships together, from our early struggles with poverty to our children's illnesses and the constant financial strain of living on a middle-class income. We were finally starting to climb towards stability. Our children had reached an age of independence, my wife had a modest but steady career, and I was earning a good income after years of financial struggle. Our debts were manageable and our future looked promising. So why risk it all for someone as shallow and empty as Gabe Zillow? Behind his charm and boldness, there was nothing substantial. Strip away the flashy exterior and there was emptiness. Gabe had never designed a site plan, built or sold a home. He was the figurehead of a business run by others, a wealthy individual with no real substance, a prodigy whose only asset was his image. What was Gloria thinking? She claimed she just wanted to have fun this weekend. Was this her idea of fun? And how would it end? I must have fallen asleep because when I descended the stairs, they had already gathered in the main room. Lunch had passed, but the drinks were still flowing and joints were being passed around. Gloria was back in Gabe's lap, and there was no denying they had kissed. The women had removed their bikini tops, including Paula, who seemed to be sharing Ken with Robin. I headed straight for the kitchen to heat up dinner in the microwave when Gloria walked in. "How are you?" she asked. "It could have been better," I replied. There was a moment of hesitation before she spoke again. "I spent the evening with Gabe," she confessed. "I noticed," I said as the microwave beeped. She gave a strange smile when I turned to attend to the microwave. "No, I mean tonight, in his room." I remained very still, facing away from her, not wanting her to see the pain she was causing. "I see. But what about our 16 years of marriage?" I questioned. "That's why I can do this. It's only for the weekend. Next week I'll be all yours again," she assured. "And Gabe won't mind?" I retorted. She hugged me from behind, burying her head against my back. "Gabe likes you. He thinks you two are going somewhere. It's just a fling. A little fun for the weekend, okay?" she asked, her words punctuated by hugs. "Can I choose?" I inquired. "Not really. It's decided. I'm just letting you know," she replied. She released me, and I heard her leave the kitchen. I walked to where the kitchen opened into the main room. They were already heading up the stairs. Gabe glanced back, smiling and giving me a thumbs up as if we were on the same page. He whispered something to Gloria, who turned around, waved, and smiled at me. I returned to the kitchen, feeling as though everything we had been through together meant nothing. My wife had left me and humiliated me. I discarded the food from the microwave and made coffee instead. It was going to be a long night. As the water started to boil, I heard footsteps entering the kitchen. I turned to find Paula observing me. "I didn't expect there to be caffeine. Wouldn't something else be better?" she queried. "Everyone has their preferences," I replied. "But tell me, what's your role here?" She shrugged in response. "I'm just trying to ensure things remain calm." "And how do you plan to do that? By sleeping with me?" She chuckled. "No, I wouldn't go that far. But don't lose hope. You'll have your wife back, and maybe even a bonus." "So, there's money involved," I noted. "Isn't it always the case? You can't make waves when you work for this man. You have to consider your family. What choice do you have but to accept what's offered? This is their world, not yours. That's just how it goes." A sharp moan of pleasure echoed from above. "Seems like she's having a good time," Paula grinned. "Well, good for her. A delightful weekend for everyone in the mountains. You know, these rocks have stood here for ages. Our existence is merely a fleeting moment for them. Thousands of years ago, they were buried under layers of ice that carved through them, forming the rivers and gorges we now navigate to make our world livable. Sometimes we forget how fragile our existence is. Remove one small piece and our world crumbles. Only then do we realize it's all an illusion." Paula laughed. "Wow, you're quite the philosopher." "No, just someone who understands what truly matters, striving to discern the genuine from the fleeting illusions." She probably assumed I wouldn't stir up any trouble, leaving me alone with my coffee and my anguish. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, I ascended the stairs. Passing the master bedroom door, I was greeted by loud screams and pleasure-filled moans from my wife. She had always been quiet during our carnal moments, but it seemed he brought her more satisfaction. Younger and more vigorous, he excelled in every aspect. It appeared my wife had found the pleasure she sought in his embrace. I showered and changed into warm attire, anticipating the cold outside. I tried to drown out the noises echoing through the walls as I waited. By the time silence finally descended upon the house, it was well past 3 o'clock in the morning. Waiting another 30 minutes, I ventured downstairs. In a kitchen cabinet, I discovered a flashlight and candles with matches. A prudent measure, I reasoned, in case reality severed our connection to electricity. The night enveloped the surroundings in a profound darkness, with the moon having already set. The nocturnal symphony of the mountains, though, felt like silence to someone accustomed to city life. I easily located a barn and a 20-gallon plastic canister filled with motorsports gas. A wrench lay nearby. Though a padlock secured the generator shed door, the hinge mechanism had succumbed to rust. The wrench swiftly liberated it. The house's owners had thoughtfully provided a manual gasoline pump, enabling me to swiftly fill the canister. In less than 10 minutes, I navigated around the lodge to reach my rented SUV's parking spot. I loaded a gas can into the back, released the handbrake, and shifted the transmission into drive. Allowing the car to roll downhill, I started it up and drove off cautiously as I neared the bridge. Carefully navigating it, I halted upon reaching the gravel road. Taking my time, I ensured the gasoline seeped into the bridge's wood. It was a meticulously crafted structure, a testament to skilled artisans who took pride in their work. Regular folks had built this bridge to facilitate the leisure of those who profited off the toil of others. But the fun was about to come to an abrupt end. Dropping the match, it sputtered before igniting. Flames swiftly erupted, and I quickly retreated as a fierce explosion of heat and fire ensued. The wooden bridge crackled and collapsed into the inferno, its blaze likely visible for miles around. Turning back to my car, I drove away leisurely. There was no need to hurry. Anyone who witnessed the fire was now stranded on the other side. I was confident I'd be long gone before they realized their predicament. By the time dawn broke, I was already stopping at a gas station off the highway. Filling up the SUV, I left the empty canister at the pumps, certain someone would eventually collect it. Any link between the fire and me would vanish. Returning the SUV around 9 a.m., I retrieved my car. After showering and dressing casually for the office, I had 2 final tasks to sever ties with Countryman Real Estate. Bernie, though a good boss, was forgetful, often leaving items in his office. With keys to every door and filing cabinet, I had easy access. Gabe, meticulous with his belongings, kept the combination to his desk safe, in a folder labeled Security, stored in a locked closet. Thanks to Bernie's keys, I gained entry and retrieved the password diary from the safe, accessing the company's personal account. It would have been simple to abscond with everything, but that wasn't my intent. Theft would only lead to trouble. Instead, I transferred the operating account to another. Initially, when I joined Countryman, we established a trust account for deposits, as per state regulations. Over time, new trust accounts were created for each project, while the original was forgotten. Although the previous account was archived, it wasn't recorded in the ledgers. It remained empty until I injected nearly $20 million into it. Safeguarding all our cash, I bolstered our line of credit as a precaution, ensuring my actions didn't seem hollow. Nothing was stolen, everything remained intact. However, it would take days to locate and return the funds. In the wee hours of Tuesday morning, electronic transfers will hit an empty account, halting hundreds of payments. Unsure of the extent of damage, our reliance on credit left us vulnerable. Remove that lifeline, and we'll face tough times, at least temporarily. It'll be an uphill battle for Countrymen to rebuild their creditworthiness. The longer the shortfall persists, the more dire the situation becomes. With luck, Gabe will still be away in the mountains. On Tuesday, once all is set, I'll print my resignation letter before departing the office. As I was about to leave, placing the letter on Gabe's secretary's desk, my cell buzzed. Glancing at the screen, I saw Gloria's photo, but I let it go to voicemail, though I couldn't resist listening.
"Where are you, baby? The car's missing and I'm worried sick. Call me,"
her voice pleaded. About 30 minutes later, Gabe called.
"Hey, Lyle, you okay? Gloria's frantic. Call her,"
he urged, with a hint of threat at the end. Oddly, it amused me. On Sunday, Gloria called 3 times, with 2 more calls from Gabe, the latter sounding more forceful, insisting I get in touch. Monday morning, I fetched the kids from Gloria's parents. As I left, Gloria called again.
"Be home tonight. We need to talk. If you get this call, I'm really worried," she implored.
"This is childish," she added. I doubted she'd return. At her parents', they were expecting me. Gloria called again, saying,
"You might be on your own picking up the kids."
Her mother urged me to call, while her father suggested waiting until she returned. "There are things we need to sort out," he remarked. Personally, I aimed to steer clear of familial debates. They weren't pleased, but there wasn't much they could do. My daughter sensed tension, but I assured her, "This is between Mom and me. We'll discuss it when she returns, out of fairness to her." After settling the kids in, I retreated to our old bedroom and dialed Felix Rodriguez. "How's it going, Lyle?" he greeted. "Not great." "Felix, I need your expertise," I confided. Felix, a top-notch family lawyer and stand-up guy, listened attentively. "What's going on?" he inquired. "I need to file for divorce," I stated firmly. We delved into details over an hour, scheduling an appointment for late Tuesday to kickstart the process. Meanwhile, calls persisted from the mountains. It seems her parents got in touch with her. The tone of the messages changed. Gloria and Gabe reached out without threats. "Hey, if I messed up, I apologize. Let's not let this weekend affect our professional relationship. It wouldn't be good for anyone if you catch my drift," Gabe stated. Later, around 5 p.m., Gloria reached out urgently. "Lyle, please call. Something's happened here. There's no bridge. We're all stuck. Call me. I need to talk," she urged. Bright and early Tuesday, I rang up Stephen Pender, my old buddy. We arranged to meet for lunch at a nearby diner. "Are you sure about this?" Stephen mused between bites. "Done deal. I've officially resigned," I affirmed. As if to emphasize, Donna, my former secretary at Countryman, called. "Lyle, they're saying you've resigned, but you've got to come in. Everything's going haywire. Something's seriously off," Donna relayed. "Sorry, I can't. I'm no longer with the company. You should ring up Gabe. They say he's stranded in the mountains. Something about a bridge, huh? Tough break. Don't worry, though. It'll all work out. Anything else I should know?" Steve inquired. "Nope, not my concern anymore," I replied. "Well, if you're sure, I think I can up my last offer by $10,000 a year. Can you start tomorrow?" "Isn't that too soon?" "Nope, perfect," Steve confirmed. Wednesday morning, I joined Pandare and Partners. Just settling in that afternoon, I had an unexpected visitor. "Where's my money? You're an idiot," Gabe Zello stormed in. "What money are you talking about?" "You know, operating funds." "Sorry, you might want to chat with the company accountants." "If I do that, I'll sue you for embezzlement," he threatened. I just smirked. He found his way down that mountain. "But where are the operational funds? You think you're some hotshot lawyer, but you're just an idiot who can't satisfy his wife. She really enjoyed her time with me, and I'll keep her happy whenever I feel like it." He spat, then stormed off. The next day, the police called me to the station for questioning. "Sorry, I've just started a new job. My time's tight, but I can respond to your questions in writing and call you back," I offered. The officer tried to explain they don't usually do that, but I insisted, citing my profession. After some back and forth, he hung up. I anticipated the police would need to investigate the embezzlement claim, tracing the money. They'd find it in the company account where I deposited it days ago. I figured that'd be the end of it. A civil matter at most, and an unsuccessful one. I was mistaken. It took them a fortnight to track down the missing funds. By then, Countryman was in dire straits. Its credit had been completely cut off by the banks, necessitating an infusion of new capital to reopen it. Gloria arrived late Friday evening with both our trip suitcases. Her key no longer worked due to my changing the locks. I met her at the door. "Please, Lyle, let me in." "Think about the children if not for me," she pleaded. "No, you don't live here anymore. I parked your car on the street. I assume you still have the keys," I replied. "Do you hate me that much?" "Yes," I affirmed, closing the door. I decided she would go to her parents. I instructed Felix to serve her with a restraining order and file for divorce. The brief reprieve the bridge provided paid off handsomely. With Felix's help, she was kept away, and I gained temporary custody of the children. It took her 2 months and likely every penny she had to get back on her feet. By then, the divorce proceedings were well underway, needing only finalization. Gabe Zillow wasn't as fortunate. Countryman Real Estate had to shut down, ceasing operations right after Labor Day. The following week, I had an unexpected visitor. He sat in the visitor's chair upon my return from closing the third deal. With a deep tan and looking healthy, he was lightly dressed for the northern autumn. "Bernie, how's it going?" I greeted. "I'm doing all right," he replied, scanning my modest office. "What brings you to the cold north?" I inquired, sensing this was no casual visit. "Well, here's the thing. Florida's swarming with sharks, and most of them aren't in the water. I figured I'd stick to what I know," he explained. "I'm glad to see you back," I said, uncertain of his intentions. Bernie read my expression. "I took a hit down there, starting over, but it seems I got lucky." "This company I own seems affordable," he revealed, a smile appearing. We exchanged knowing smiles. "So what's on your mind, old pirate?" I asked. "Well, here's the deal. I need a partner. At my age, bankers doubt any venture I start will last, and, well, you and I make a good team. What do you say?" he proposed. "I have very little money. You've probably heard about my impending divorce," I mentioned. "Yes, I have," he acknowledged, hinting at the spreading gossip. "Let's go with 10%, he offered. 50? Let's be reasonable. You said you're strapped for cash, but I'll settle for 45%, I countered. Look, 25% is fair, but it's not enough. How about 40% and an option to buy another 10% in 10 years, he negotiated. All right, let's hope I live to see it, I quipped, knowing he'd likely outlast me. Bernie and I were back in business. We acquired every lot owned by Countryman at a discount using the same bank's funds. I anticipated challenges, but our business quickly thrived, constructing and selling homes. Life progressed as usual, as did my divorce proceedings. It largely centered on custody and visitation. Ultimately, we devised a complex joint custody and visitation arrangement. That's why I returned to a dark, empty house on Christmas Eve. Gloria had taken the children for Christmas, though I was supposed to have them. Given that Christmas fell on a Sunday, they had to return to her on Monday, her day off. The kids struggled with this routine. Approaching the house, I spotted a figure on the steps, sheltered from the cold and the light snowfall. I was beside her before recognizing my ex-wife. "Gloria, what are you doing here?" I inquired. She didn't seem well. Thinner than before, her eyes appeared vacant and indifferent. It was evident she had recently cried. "I want to go home," she whimpered. "Where are the children?" I asked, sidestepping her request. "With my parents. They want to come home too. We want to be a family again in our little house. What you did to us is unfair." "I didn't do anything like that." "Well, yes, that's true. I made a mistake, okay? It was a bad and hurtful mistake, but it was just one mistake." "You're the one who tore our family apart," she accused, her voice tinged with anger. Making a conscious effort to regain composure, she said, "I promised myself I wouldn't lose my temper, but you need to understand, I struggle with anger because of this." "You have anger issues?" I was surprised. "Don't act innocent. That's not who you are. Were you just ahead of the game?" "I'm not naive, Lyle. You were never a saint." "I know I hurt you, but it was never intentional. Do you honestly expect me to believe that sleeping with another man right in front of me wouldn't hurt?" I replied. She turned away, clearly wounded by my words. I watched as she wiped her eyes, her back now facing me. It was evident she was crying. I was always the overweight one, the last choice on the dance floor. I had to settle for whoever showed interest. I was a good girl, enduring countless insults. I waited all through high school and most of college for the right person. When I met you, I thought I had found him. I was a maid when we got married. I didn't make a fuss about it, but I assumed you knew. You weren't a prince then, and you certainly aren't now. You were just an ordinary guy, but I loved you with all my heart. Yes, you were a bit sharper and more ambitious than the rest. But we were always struggling financially. I learned to adjust my expectations because of my love for you. It pained me to witness your constant struggles. Then Gabriel entered the picture, and suddenly everything seemed to improve. He possessed all the qualities a woman desires in a man. This time the prince had his eyes on me. It was incredibly flattering. After the Christmas party, he kept reaching out to me. It wasn't serious, just harmless flirting. You know, attractive women often receive attention like that. I've been approached before, but never by someone from the beautiful and powerful elite. He spoke highly of you and expressed how fortunate I am to have such an amazing boyfriend like you. I bet he was just enamored with me, I remarked. Exactly. He mentioned how hard you work and how he wants to reward you. I understood his implications. If I played nice with him, he would take care of you. I suppose I let him convince me that you would benefit if I gave in to him. And it's true. There was a part of me that desired him. It felt like there was this irrational urge guiding me toward him. I was torn between hoping something would happen over the weekend and fearing it. But once we arrived, my resistance began to fade. I turned to you and confessed. What? Are you serious? You told me you were considering sleeping with him. Okay. I didn't say it outright. But you knew what was going on and you didn't object, she said, turning to me. Tears streamed down her cheeks, dripping from her chin, and her nose was running. I trusted you. We've spent 16 years together. How could you betray me like this? I lamented. But that's the crux of it. We loved each other. It was merely a fleeting affair. It pales in comparison to what we shared before and what lies ahead. Are you so deluded to think that, after hearing your cries of pleasure for him, we can salvage anything meaningful? Oh, for heaven's sake, you can't be that naive. It was all a facade. I aimed to please him. I put on quite a performance. Individuals like him demand and anticipate such theatrics. That's not how I behave in bed. And after 16 years of closeness with me, you should know that. All I know is what you did, how you degraded me. You chose the golden boy over me, the cad who offers nothing and takes everything. Powerful, isn't it? So, where is he now? What happened when the crisis hit? I'll tell you everything. He folded under pressure. We live in a society that perpetuates the dominance of the few over the many based on the myth of some hidden brilliance they possess. Explain to me, how did this genius manage to descend the mountain so swiftly? He called for a helicopter. By then, he suspected that you had tampered with the business. It was glaringly obvious that you had sabotaged the bridge. He thought you embezzled his funds. The others began to panic. Paula insisted that this couldn't be true, that it couldn't happen like that. When the helicopter arrived, there was only space for Gabe. The rest resigned. I believe the National Guard eventually erected a temporary bridge to rescue us. Sharon and I reconciled. By then, her husband had already discovered the truth. She faced consequences just like me. Poor Robin's fiancé called off the engagement. Glenn and Ken encountered trouble, but I think they managed to resolve it with Paula's assistance. It seems it was only Gabe and us, regular folks, who truly bore the brunt of it all. But wasn't the pain sufficient? She asked, peering at me with hope. Gloria's words held a lot of truth. I wasn't entirely blameless. I toiled for Gabe, yet unlike the rest of the world, I never aligned myself with him. I knew the truth, but refused to acknowledge it to myself. I can't overlook how it transpired. They were nothing but empty promises. If scrutinized closely, one could discern a trap. But no one looked. Illusion proved more enticing than reality. We weathered through tough times, and they passed with time. What you and Gabe stripped from me was the sanctuary of my home. I'll never regain it, because those scoundrels demonstrated that what I believed in was a mirage. You and I were an illusion. With that said, I rose and made for the door of the dim, vacant house. She persisted. "Answer me this," she implored. "Would you prefer solitude without me, or would you rather be with me and our children around the Christmas tree tonight?" I gazed at her. It would be effortless to embrace her, cherish her, bring the children back to sleep in their own beds on Christmas Eve, and pretend that what occurred never did. But all I could muster was, "That's a valid question. But I lack an answer." With those words, we turned away from each other. The past cannot be altered. We must forge ahead for our future.
Before that turning point, Judith and Rick's relationship was strong, built on admiration and shared dreams. They met 15 years ago, fresh out of Rutgers University, and quickly bonded at a friend's party. After 2 years of dating, they moved in together and later married. They built a stable home and had 2 sons, Will and Robert, whom they raised with love. Judith had a successful career as a designer, and Rick was a supportive husband. However, as Judith's career took off, things shifted. Her long work hours began to strain the family. Though Rick was patient, subtle cracks in their relationship started to appear. Judith reassured herself that she could juggle her career and family life, believing she had it all under control. Judith often reflected on her good fortune, feeling lucky for her full life. At 40-something, she still admired her appearance, a tall, fit blonde with youthful eyes. These thoughts vanished as she packed for her upcoming trip to San Diego. She folded her clothes carefully and made sure her luggage was ready before Rick and the boys returned. The trip was a reward from Dalton Industries for a successful project launch. Judith was excited, though Rick hadn't been thrilled about her being away again. She had worked hard to convince him, and he eventually agreed, though not happily. Judith, a top designer at Casual Creations, specialized in packaging design. Her recent project was a success, and she was proud of her work, even though it meant spending long hours away from her family. As she prepared dinner that evening, she thought about the previous night with Rick. Their lovemaking had been intense, more passionate than usual. The memory made her want to make the evening special before leaving. Dinner was ready, and everything was on schedule as Rick and the boys arrived. Judith didn't want to dwell on the past. Right now, her focus was on her family, her husband Rick and their 2 boys, Will and Robert. Will, nearly 9, was carefree, while 7-year-old Robert was more serious. They balanced each other well, and Judith loved them equally. She and Rick had met at a party 15 years ago, instantly connecting despite attending Rutgers without crossing paths. After dating for 2 years, they moved in together and eventually married. She cherished the memory of Rick's proposal, and their life had been wonderful. When they were ready, they were blessed with 2 healthy boys. Judith had it all, though a slight chill ran through her at the thought, which she brushed off as nerves about her trip. She greeted her boys with hugs as they came home, Rick following close behind. She embraced Rick, noticing his tension. Although he relaxed, there was a shadow in his eyes. "You don't have to go, you know. We all want you to stay," Rick said, looking into her eyes. "It's too late now. It's just a quick business trip," she replied, attempting another hug, but he moved toward the powder room. Dinner was lively, with the boys talking about their day and upcoming school projects. Will wanted to make an erupting volcano for the science fair, while Robert preferred something unique. Their banter was good-natured, and Rick let them go on before eventually stepping in. Judith enjoyed the moment, but soon it was time to get ready. Rick insisted they'd clean up later. Packed and ready, Judith hugged and kissed her boys before sending them off to play. She turned to Rick. "I'll miss you all. It's just 3 nights. You'll pick me up Wednesday, right?" Rick nodded with a smile. "Don't worry, it's all set. You go enjoy yourself." Judith noticed the same darkness in his eyes, but before she could say anything, a car horn interrupted them. "That's Rachel. I'd better go," she said, giving Rick a quick hug and kiss before grabbing her bag and heading out the door. She glanced back, but Rick had already gone inside. Feeling uneasy, she told herself it was just her imagination. In the car, Rachel joked, 3 days at Redstone. Too bad you're so happily married. Could have been fun." Judith laughed, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too late to turn back now. At the airport, Judith checked her bags, went through security, and found her gate. Just as she sat down, Wes Southern joined her with a grin. "Ready for San Diego? Too bad we can't skip the meetings and just stay in bed," he joked, referencing their previous encounters. Judith smiled despite her unease, knowing they'd have plenty of time together during the trip. She and Wes had started their affair 2 months earlier after a long day at work. Exhausted, they fell asleep on her office couch, and when she woke, she mistook Wes's touch for Rick's. Guilt battled pleasure, but she gave in. What began as a one-time encounter soon became more frequent, though they kept it casual and secret, using protection to avoid complications. Over time, her guilt faded, and she resumed closeness with Rick, though something still felt off. Judith convinced herself the affair wasn't serious and that it didn't affect her marriage. This trip, although it gave her time alone with Wes, still felt work-related and not like a full-blown affair. She rationalized that everything would return to normal afterward, and she would refocus on Rick. In San Diego, after checking in, Judith called home and spoke to her boys for an hour. But when she asked for Rick, they said he was upstairs and quickly hung up. She was confused. Why had Rick been so quick to get rid of her? Could he suspect something? She brushed off the thought, assuming it was just guilt, and met Wes for dinner. After dinner, they headed to her room, eager to be together. The night was filled with passion, and they eventually fell asleep before dawn. But in the early morning, as Judith drifted between sleep and wakefulness, she felt a deep sense of loneliness and sadness. The intensity of it woke her, repeating, "No, no, no." Drenched in sweat, she got up and stood in the shower, trying to wash away the feeling. The 3 days flew by, with nights filled with sex between Judith and Wes. Though it had always been exciting due to the secrecy, it soon began to feel routine. The thrill faded, and by the end of the trip, they both agreed to end the affair on good terms. Judith was eager to return home to Rick and the boys, but she hadn't been able to reach them the last 2 nights. Her calls went unanswered, with only the answering machine picking up. At the airport, she tried calling Rick's office, but there was no answer, so she left a reminder about picking her up. She boarded the plane and quickly fell asleep, despite Wes's joking comment about joining the Mile High Club. When they landed at Kennedy, Wes stayed behind as Judith headed to baggage claim, expecting Rick to be there, but instead of Rick, she saw a man holding a sign with her name. He explained he was sent to pick her up and take her home. Assuming Rick was just busy, Judith agreed and got into the limo. She called Rick's phone again, but only got his voicemail. Now she was starting to worry. The drive seemed endless, and all her attempts to contact Rick failed. When they finally reached her house, it looked dark and deserted. Before she could get out, the driver handed her an envelope with her name on it in Rick's handwriting. Feeling panicked, she grabbed her bag and rushed inside. The house was quiet with only a few lights on. She searched every room, but no one was home. Upstairs in their bedroom, everything seemed normal until she noticed Rick's closet door was open, something he never left that way. When she looked closer, she realized all of his clothes were gone. Rick had left. Feeling sick to her stomach, Judith slowly walked into her boys' room. The beds were made, but their computers, favorite posters, and clothes were all gone. Panic rising, she ran downstairs searching for a note, then remembered the manila envelope. Grabbing it from the kitchen table, she tore it open and collapsed into a chair. Inside were photos, a report from Spaulding Investigations, and a document titled Decree for Dissolution of Marriage. Judith screamed. Overwhelmed by grief, she cried uncontrollably, pleading for another chance, throwing dishes in her despair until she finally passed out. When she woke to the morning sunlight, she numbly gathered the papers she'd thrown across the room. The first thing she saw were the photos, incriminating shots of her and Wes. She rushed to the sink, her stomach turning, then returned to the table, pushing the rest of the pictures aside. The report detailed her affair, with dates, times, and photo references documenting her betrayal. Judith didn't have the strength to read more and laid the report down. The legal document, thick and official, sat there, but she couldn't face reading it. Instead, she opened the envelope with a note from Rick. The letter began, "Judith, by now you know the boys and I are gone. I took our clothes, some of the boys' important things, and my stuff from the den. We're in a small apartment for now until we divide our assets," Rick continued, explaining how he found out about the affair. One night, after she said she'd be working late, he brought her a milkshake, only to discover her with Wes in her office. He had watched briefly, then left with the milkshake, thankful the boys had stayed in the car. That night, he told her he had a headache, a night she likely wouldn't even remember. She remembered that night vividly. It was the first time she and Wes had slept together. Overcome with guilt, she had dreaded facing Rick. But when she got home, Rick said he wasn't feeling well, and she was relieved she didn't have to talk to him. She even said a small prayer of thanks. Rick's letter continued, explaining how he had hired a private investigator, hoping it was just a one-time mistake. But it wasn't. The investigator easily installed a camera in her office after Rick copied her key. Rick admitted he couldn't look at many of the photos, though she seemed to be enjoying herself with Wes. When Judith mentioned the business trip, Rick had already planned to move out while she was gone. He learned Wes was joining her, though she had lied about who would be there. Rick expressed his anger, feeling betrayed, not just by the affair, but by the deliberate deception. He could have forgiven a single mistake, but not a planned betrayal. Rick assured her his lawyer would contact her soon, and he hoped they could settle custody and visitation peacefully. Though he no longer loved her, he wanted the boys to stay in their home. He ended the letter by saying they had nothing more to discuss and that he was done with her. Judith now understood the fear and dread she had been feeling. It was her conscience trying to warn her. But it was too late. Rick was gone, and she had lost everything. Years passed, and Judith and Rick led separate lives, both achieving success in their careers. Judith owned her own company, having built it through hard work. Sitting in her office, she shuffled papers on her desk, trying to make a decision. She reminded herself she didn't need to please anyone but her client, yet she was struggling. She thought about how Rick had always been a great sounding board for her ideas. She picked up her 3 best concepts and murmured, "Let's see what he'd think of these." She started with the weakest one, imagining Rick's feedback, knowing it needed improvement. Then she moved on to the next. Still nothing. Damn, he was tough. That's why I always turned to him for advice. Okay, here's the last one. 2 people are holding hands, walking down the street. unaware of a speeding car heading toward them. The man says, "I got the papers from our Continental insurance agent today. We're covered for anything." In the background, the car swerves and hits a light pole instead. They walk away, oblivious to the danger. "Yeah, that's the best one. The client will like it. I'll have Clark start on it tomorrow. Tonight I'm too tired." I stood up, turned off the light, and saw Will in the doorway. He smiled sadly. "Talking to Dad again?" "Yeah, it helps," I said. And it did. Talking to Rick always made things clearer. "What are you doing up? You have school tomorrow?" "Just getting water. I'm not missing the final game tomorrow." "Neither am I. We'll be behind the bench cheering you on." He smiled and walked off to bed. Tomorrow was the final basketball game, and if Will's team won, they'd go to the state quarterfinals. It was a long shot, but Will, a starting guard and senior, was hopeful. He was tall, strong, and had the talent for a scholarship. He was his father's son. I followed him to the kitchen, watching him finish his water before waving goodnight. I sat down, not ready for bed. Will was smart, not as brilliant as Robert, but still sharp. He had heard me talking to Rick again, and while he accepted it, Robert hated it. Rick and I divorced after 15 years of marriage, and today marked 8 years since it became official. It was my fault, and I had told the boys when they were old enough. Will took it hard, but eventually forgave me. Robert took longer. After the divorce, Rick never tried to take the boys away from me. He wanted unlimited visitation, and I agreed because having my boys was all I had left. When I went through dark times, Rick took the boys until I was stable. They supported me, likely with Rick's help, and were the reason I kept going. As they grew older, they spent more time at home and less with Rick, who was busy with work. I let them have their freedom, and they became strong, confident young men. Rick and I rarely spoke except about the boys. Financially, we were both stable, so there were no issues with alimony or child support. Over the years, we found a way to cooperate and support each other when needed. It was a peaceful, comfortable arrangement. After several hard years, I don't think Rick ever forgave me, but at least he no longer seemed to hate me. That was a relief. I still talked to him in my mind because I never stopped loving him or relying on his advice. Even though he wasn't there, I could imagine our conversations clearly, and it always helped. It kept me sane, especially during the dark times after our divorce when I almost drowned in depression. Rick was cold for the first 2 years after the divorce. He wouldn't speak to me or let me explain, though I wasn't even sure why I did what I did. His lawyer handled everything, and when I resisted, Rick threatened to change the divorce terms and take the boys. I gave in and signed what he wanted. After the divorce, I spiraled. I threw myself into my job, the only thing I had besides my boys. Though Wes was still around, we had no contact by mutual agreement, but he bragged about our affair, which hurt my reputation at work. People saw me differently, and I became isolated. One night, a colleague asked me out. I initially refused, but then accepted, thinking it might help me move on. I drank too much, and we ended up at his place. The Zex was rough and quick, leaving me feeling empty, but I convinced myself I didn't need Rick. Over the next few weeks, I went on more dates, but they all ended the same, unsatisfying and leaving me feeling used. One night, I woke up on the floor of my living room, disheveled and alone, with only vague memories of the evening. I couldn't remember who I had been with, but I knew I had hit rock bottom. That night, I realized how far I'd fallen. Shame and disgust washed over me, and I questioned what I had become. Thankfully, my boys were with their father that weekend, sparing them from seeing me at my lowest. Eventually, I calmed down enough to clean up and make some important decisions. I found an old phone book in Rick's office and scheduled a doctor's appointment. I also resigned from my job, knowing I had to move forward. My sons kept me going, but I was alone most days while they were in school. I came close to doing something reckless more than once, but I didn't, which was a miracle. Before I lost everything, I saw a therapist, Cheryl Hopkins, recommended by my doctor. She put me on medication and helped me slowly regain control of my life. At first, I barely held on, but over time, I fought my way back. Through therapy, I realized that even though I had everything, a successful career, 2 wonderful boys, and a loving husband, it wasn't enough for me. I didn't know why, but I went looking for something more. That's how my affair with Wes began. He was attractive and flirtatious, and I responded. The thrill of the forbidden outweighed the guilt, and we started an affair that lasted 3 months, culminating in the San Diego trip. But it cost me my marriage. I continued working, but my reputation had suffered. Wes had talked about our affair, and I became known more for that than my professional skills. Though I had the option of claiming sexual discrimination, I chose not to stir trouble as long as they left me alone. I also made poor decisions by dating men who took advantage of my vulnerability. These meaningless encounters left me feeling empty, and I eventually realized I had hit rock bottom. That's when I called my doctor and began the long climb out of my depression, with Cheryl's relentless support. It took 2 years, but I finally recovered, though I still check in with her occasionally. I quit my job and left that chapter behind, but I needed to work for my own sanity. Rick had left me the house and enough financial support, but I wanted to build something new. So I started my own business, J. Proctor Packaging Concepts, from home. I used some equity from the house to get a loan and bought the necessary equipment: a high-performance computer, color copier, drafting board, and tools for graphic design and packaging. With that, I began rebuilding my life. At the time, Will had just turned 13, and Robert was 11. They helped a lot, giving me time to work in the evenings while they entertained themselves. It was a good setup. We compromised. I took them to their games, and they gave me quiet time to focus on my business. They understood what I was trying to do, and we worked as a team. It was a great period in my life as I started gaining clients. At first, I got a few referrals from former colleagues. I lost the first 2 accounts but secured the third, and my business began to grow. As it expanded, I hired a small team to handle calls, drafts, and sales. I had a small office built behind the house, which worked perfectly. Over the next 2 years, my business grew steadily, and I became financially successful, paying off my loans. Fast forward a few more years. Will was 17. Robert was almost 16. And I had turned 48. My business was thriving with 12 employees, and I kept it small, focusing on clients who wanted top-quality work. I was financially secure, and the boys had everything they needed. I didn't rely on Rick much anymore, and he agreed to put his support payments into a college fund for the boys. Will was likely to get a basketball scholarship to Ohio State, and Robert, being academically gifted, would easily secure one too. Both boys were popular. Will had a serious girlfriend, and Robert was starting to date as well. My business success brought social connections, and I was well known in the community, often invited to important events. But one thing was missing. I didn't date. Since crawling out of the emotional hole I had fallen into, I hadn't cared about any man. I had plenty of offers from wealthy single men, but I wasn't interested. I only cared about one man, Rick. When Rick left me, it was dramatic. He packed up and moved out while I was on a 3-day trip with Wes. I told Rick it was for business, which was true, but I didn't mention Wes. Rick already knew, though. He had everything documented. I foolishly believed I could keep the affair hidden, thinking consequences were for others. Ironically, during that trip, I realized I was done with cheating. I thought about Rick the whole time I was with Wes. By the end of the trip, I had recommitted to my marriage. But when I returned, Rick had already left, leaving behind photos, divorce papers, and a blunt letter saying we were finished. I deserved it. That triggered my depression, which took 2 years to overcome. Then I spent another 5 years building my business. Despite the divorce, I still considered myself married, holding on to the promise I made to myself on the plane ride back from San Diego, to rededicate myself to Rick. Even though it was too late, my pride wouldn't let me break that promise. During those years, I met several interesting men. I fantasized about a few, even having some erotic dreams, but my only indulgence was a blue toy I kept locked away. I used it occasionally when my boys were out for the night, and though I started thinking of those men, I always ended up thinking of Rick when I climaxed. Strange, right? Life, however, kept moving forward. The night after I had one of those thoughts, Robert and I were at Will's basketball game, and his team pulled off a huge upset, winning and advancing to the state quarterfinals. Will was ecstatic, and Robert was just as thrilled. Proud of my boys, I agreed to let Will's team celebrate at our house. We had the space, a pool, and enough parent chaperones to keep everything under control. The night was a success, and I set about rearranging my schedule to be there for the upcoming regional game. The next day, while working on my schedule in the kitchen, the phone rang. Without checking the caller ID, I answered, "Hello, this is Judith Proctor." Balancing the phone on my shoulder, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in a while. "Rick." "Hi, Judith. It's me." His familiar voice sent a chill through me. "Yes, I recognized your voice. Good to hear from you. How have you been?" I replied. "Good. I was wondering about the regional game schedule. I want to see Will play, but don't know the details." "I'm just planning that now," I said. "The game is next Saturday in Columbus. Robert and I are driving down Friday night. We've got tickets, including one for you." "Could we get together for dinner?" Rick asked, surprising me. "The four of us before the game? I'd also like to sit with you and Robert during the game." Dinner together? We hadn't done that in the 8 years since our divorce. We were civil for the boys, but never spent time as a family. "Sure, that would be great," I replied, still processing the unexpected invitation. Will would love to see us together. I told him we were staying at the Madison Hotel, while the other families had rooms at the Marriott Courtyard. Rick was listed under Will's family, so booking a room would be easy. As I hung up, I couldn't help but wonder why he wanted to have dinner with us. Was it something new? Was he engaged? Or was there another reason for this sudden change? Rick mentioned he liked the idea of staying at the hotel and might book a room there. I said goodbye, still in shock from the call, and hoped I hadn't missed anything important. I pushed my emotions aside and finished my scheduling, which now felt even more significant. After all, I was going to have dinner with my ex-husband. The ex part didn't matter much to me. I didn't mention the dinner to Will or Robert until right before we left. Will had already spoken to Rick, knowing he planned to attend the game and spend time with them, but said nothing about us eating together. The night before the trip, I made sure the boys were packed and then called them to the kitchen for apple pie, something they both loved. "Boys, I have news. The three of us are having dinner with your father the night before the game. He called and asked, and I said yes." I expected a reaction, but neither of them said a word. They just kept eating. Their casual attitude surprised me, but then I realized they saw it as normal for such a big event. To them, it wasn't a big deal, but to me, it was huge. I hadn't shared a meal with Rick in nearly 8 years. "Well, it's a big deal to me," I said. "I'm excited." Will looked up and smiled. "We know it's a big deal, Mom. Dad asked us if we were okay with it, and we said yes." I felt embarrassed. "Why didn't you tell me? I made such a fuss." Will reassured me. "You're the coolest, Mom. The team thinks so too. Dad's looking forward to it, and it'll be great if we can all get along." They teased me for overreacting, but I sensed their excitement too. After cleaning up, I packed the car, but my nerves only grew. I couldn't shake the thought that Rick had found someone new and would use this dinner to tell us. He had dated before, including a serious relationship with Leslie Wells a few years back, and I remembered how sick that conversation made me. Though their relationship ended, I feared Rick might now be ready for something more permanent, and dinner would be the moment he'd break the news. Rick's second serious relationship was about 1.5 years ago with a younger woman, Jean Chambers. She was at least 10 years younger than him. At first I found it amusing, but then I became concerned when he used the word love to describe her. I ended the conversation quickly. He never mentioned her again, but I assumed they were still together. I made it clear to my boys that their father's relationships were off limits in conversations with me, and they respected that. I was convinced this dinner was Rick's way of telling us he was going to propose to Jean. Rick would tell us before making it official. He was always polite and considerate. He had every right to move on, especially after what I did to him, but the thought still stung. The next day, we set off for the drive to Columbus for Will's quarterfinal game. Will was with his team on the bus, and Robert and I drove separately. I wanted to arrive early enough to shower, change, and prepare for dinner. I had a new dress, shoes, and jewelry, and even wore the perfume Rick bought me years ago. I wanted him to remember what he had walked away from. After checking in at the hotel, I let Robert have his own room, explaining he'd have to share with Will later. We decided to check if the team's bus had arrived, but we had beaten it by over an hour. While Robert led the way, I browsed the hotel lobby and nearby shops. Eventually, the bus arrived, and we saw Will with his girlfriend, Jill. After greeting her, Will spotted us and came over. He and Robert went to their room to change, while I headed back to the lobby to window shop and people watch. A short while later, I saw Rick walk in. It was both a shock and a thrill to see him again. I didn't make myself known, but watched as he checked in, efficiently as always. He still looked great, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of memories. Even when I fantasized about other men, it was Rick who always came to mind. I went back to my room to get ready and composed myself, making sure I was calm when Rick called. After finishing my hair and makeup, I checked on the boys. They were talking about the game, full of excitement. They looked handsome in clean shirts and pressed jeans. Okay, I pressed their jeans, but still. I returned to my room to finish getting ready. I wanted to put on my dress at the last moment to avoid wrinkles. As I fastened my necklace, the phone rang. It was Rick. "Are you ready?" he asked. 5 minutes, I replied, trying to steady my nerves. After hanging up, I started to panic. The reality of sitting down to dinner with Rick hit me hard. I called to the boys, and when they came into my room, Will whistled. "Wow, Mom, you look hot," he said with a grin. His compliment choked me up. I smiled and kissed him on the forehead, and as he pretended to protest, he whispered, "Go for it, Mom." I was ready. With Will's encouragement, my fears faded. I decided to enjoy the evening with my handsome sons and ex-husband, ignoring the consequences. I linked arms with the boys, and we headed to the elevator to meet Rick. Rick stood in the lobby holding a small box. When he saw us, he smiled and walked over. For a moment, we looked like a regular family: husband, wife, and 2 sons. Rick complimented me, saying I looked beautiful, and I thanked him, blushing. He greeted Robert with a teasing remark and shook Will's hand, sharing a meaningful glance with him. Then he handed Will the box. "This was given to me by my father when I went to college," Rick said. "Now it's time to pass it on to you." Will hesitated, then opened the box to reveal a gold pocket watch, intricately engraved. He admired it, clearly moved by the gesture. Robert was excited too, showing no jealousy. I felt a surge of pride in my boys, and a tear welled up in my eye, which I quickly wiped away. "Shall we sit down?" I said, trying to keep things light. Rick, understanding, gently took my arm, and we were seated in the restaurant. Rick sat next to me while Will and Robert sat across, both grinning. Dinner was fun. The boys devoured burgers and fries, while I had a salad and sandwich. Rick enjoyed a steak, and we all laughed and talked easily. For dessert, the boys had pie. Rick ordered sorbet, and I skipped. My dress was tight enough as it was. After dinner, the boys left to meet their curfew, leaving me alone with Rick for the first time in years. Surprisingly, I wasn't scared. I had already lost him long ago. Rick ordered coffee, and I nodded in agreement, wanting the evening to continue. We sat in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's company. I realized how much I had missed this connection. I wondered why we couldn't have parted as friends, but I knew the answer. The pain I had caused him was too deep to easily forgive. The waiter brought our coffee, pouring it for us before stepping away. Now we were truly alone. I wasn't sure what to say and wondered if I should be the one to start. After all, wasn't this the conversation I had wanted for so long but never had? Should I take the chance now and say the things I'd kept bottled up? Just as I worked up the nerve to speak, Rick turned to me. "Judith, can I ask you something? Just a few things that have been on my mind for a while, if that's okay." I was relieved that he started the conversation. "Of course, Rick. Anything. Just ask." He hesitated, then asked, "Is it true you talk to me as if I'm there? As if I'm actually with you?" That's what he wanted to ask? God, I'd prayed for this opportunity. "Yes, it's true," I admitted. I've always done that, ever since I started the business. I valued your advice so much that, when you weren't around, I pretended you were. I knew you so well that I could imagine what you'd say, so I filled in for you. You have no idea how much you've helped me." Rick looked at me, surprised. "Why didn't you just call me for advice? Wouldn't that have made more sense?" "Rick, you made it clear you wanted nothing to do with me. We both know why. So why would I call you for advice?" I asked, holding his gaze. He nodded in understanding and looked away. For a moment, I thought I'd been too blunt, but then he turned back to me. "You never date," Rick said suddenly. "Why is that? I know things didn't work out after the divorce, but you're still beautiful and successful. I know plenty of men would love to go out with you. Why haven't you dated?" It was the question I'd expected, and I was ready for it. I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. What did I have to lose? I made a mistake 8 years ago, and I paid the price for it. I had no choice but to pay it, and I have. But after working with Cheryl Hopkins, my therapist, I realized there was only one man for me, and that man was you. I saw him about to object, so I quickly added, "Before you say anything, you need to understand. I made that promise on the flight home from San Diego. Wes and I had already ended our affair. I was ready to recommit to our marriage and to you. I realize now how naive that was, to think I could just walk back into your life after what I'd done. But nothing I did then was reasonable or fair. I know that now. I screwed up, Rick. It was all my fault. I take full responsibility." I watched Rick process what I was saying. Taking another deep breath, I continued. "After the divorce, I promised myself I'd be the perfect wife for you, even though I knew I couldn't be with you anymore. I've kept that promise, Rick. Even though we're divorced, I've stayed faithful. Dating someone else would feel like cheating on you. And I can't do that. I won't do that." Rick looked confused, unsure of what to say. I smiled gently and, after a few moments of silence, added, "And I'll tell you something the boys don't know. Sometimes I think of, well, let's just say inappropriate things I'd like to do with other men. But guess who I always end up with in my dreams?" Rick still looked puzzled, so I waited a few seconds before revealing the truth. "You, Rick. Even in my dreams, I can't cheat on you. I may imagine other men at first, but you're always the one I end up with." Watching his expression, I couldn't help but laugh. It was too funny. He had no idea how to respond, and for the first time in 8 years, I had the upper hand. God, how good it felt to say something serious, funny, and absurd to my ex-husband without any fighting or drama. It was just fun, and I realized I was enjoying myself. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "I just wanted to tell you the truth, whether you believe it or not. I know my credibility isn't exactly your top priority." Rick shook his head, still unsure how to take it or what to say. "I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, but that's fine. One more question, if you don't mind. What are your plans for the future? If you don't date and won't date anyone else, do you plan to stay single for the rest of your life? I can't believe that's what you want." Yes. There wasn't anything else to say. That was my choice, and I made it 6 years ago, after I emerged from that dark place. I explained it to Cheryl, and she accepted it as a reasonable decision. I had my reasons, and she knew them, so she never tried to change my mind. Rick looked at me, his eyes locked on mine. I met his gaze, my confidence in my own life and decisions giving me the strength to stand firm. If I couldn't have Rick because of what I did to him, then I'd paid the price, and I was free to make my own choices. I chose to be alone. Rick was still processing everything I had told him. I had been honest, given him the truth, and he knew it. There wasn't much for him to say, so he stayed quiet. I suggested we move to the lounge for a nightcap, and he gave me a look I didn't recognize. After 8 years, though, people change. Rick slid out of the booth, reached back to offer me his hand, and led me to the lounge. As I followed, I admired him from behind. He really was a striking man. He stopped to pay the bill while I waited in the lobby, noticing a few glances from men nearby. I was used to that kind of attention, and ignored most of it, except for a few interesting looks. But I never gave the wrong impression. No flirtatious gestures, no lingering eyes, nothing to suggest I was available. Rick came over, took my arm gently, and guided me into the lounge. We sat at a small table in the back, and instead of sitting across from me, he chose to sit beside me. I was pleasantly surprised and smiled widely. He smiled back. "Judith, I have to tell you something. Over the past 3 years, I've hired a private investigator to check up on you, just to prove to myself that Will and Robert weren't exaggerating about how you lived. I never wanted to invade your privacy, but I couldn't help but wonder about your personal life." My smile faded. After everything I'd done, I deserved to be punished. But what right did he have to keep tabs on me after all this time? It wasn't fair, and I felt a surge of anger. For the first time in years, I knew I had to say something to Rick, even if it risked pushing him away. After 8 years and a divorce where you cut me out of your life, you decided to investigate me? I never did that to you. I told the boys not to discuss you or bring your affairs or flings into my home. I respected your privacy. Why couldn't you do the same for me? "I'm sorry," he said. At first I told myself it was to protect the boys, but I knew that wasn't true. You were a great mother, and they've told me countless times how much they adored you and how you gave them everything they needed to thrive. Then I told myself I just wanted to see how you lived without a husband. That was closer to the truth. It shocked me to see how you lived. Never dating, only going out with women or clients. I couldn't understand why, and it drove me crazy. That's part of why I wanted to join you tonight and for the game tomorrow. I needed to see for myself that you're happy and content with your life. And I'm convinced you are. You're happier and more at peace than I ever saw you before. It's a real improvement. I listened carefully to everything Rick said, and strangely enough, I believed him. The Rick I knew wouldn't invade my privacy without a reason. This was his way, and I understood him. He was still looking out for me, and for our sons, of course. Well, I guess you had your reasons, but I would have appreciated it more if you had just asked me. We talked from time to time. You could have asked. Would you have answered me? Honestly? Yes, Rick, I would have. This is who I am now, the person I became 5 years ago. I'm not the same woman who cheated on you, the one you shattered. I know who I am now, and I know what I did. I've paid the price. What's the saying? Do the crime, do the time. Well, I did the crime, and the time afterward was hell. For 3 years, I lived in darkness. First the divorce, then the fallout, the depression, the downfall. But I picked myself up and moved on. So yes, I would have told you everything. I would have welcomed the chance to explain why I did what I did. I prayed for the chance to say 2 things to you, Rick. Just 2 simple things. You were never at fault for any of it, and I'm so sorry for what I did. Rick listened intently, and when I finished, his eyes widened. I could see a glassiness in them, as if he was fighting back tears. Rick was a proud, strong man, and I knew how hard it was for him to let me see him like this. So, like any loving wife would do, I stood and excused myself to the ladies' room. I moved quickly to protect myself from breaking down in front of him. Once inside, I let myself go. I cried to release the tension, and when I finished, I was done. I had said what needed to be said. I was proud of myself, and I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Those simple words had been incredibly powerful. I rinsed my face with water, reapplied my lipstick, and put a few drops in my eyes to hide the redness. I looked at my reflection. Yes, I was ready to go back. When I returned to the table, Rick was sitting with his hands folded in front of him. He looked up as I approached and greeted me with a huge smile, a look of pride. Proud to be with me. Be still, my heart. Silly girl. He stood like the gentleman he always was, and waited until I sat down. Then he surprised me by saying, "Thank you for giving me time to compose myself. You always did know me better than I knew myself." "I did," I replied, "but that's because I loved you so much. It came naturally. It still does, Rick. I still love you, you know." I nearly tensed, preparing for his reaction. I was ready for anything: anger, pain, disgust, surprise, even embarrassment. Any of those would make sense from someone I'd hurt as deeply as I hurt Rick. I was prepared for the worst. What he said next completely surprised me. "I believe you, Judith. I really do believe you love me now, and that you loved me then. I never doubted that. My actions weren't because I thought you loved Wes more than me. I divorced you because your betrayal hurt so badly that I couldn't find a way forward with you. And I tried. I really tried. When I found out what you were doing, I asked myself if I could forgive and forget. I was almost ready to accept it as a mistake we could move past. Then you lied about the San Diego trip and who you were going with. That's when I knew my love wasn't enough. I had no choice." As I listened, my heart broke. Not for me, but for him. His voice softened as he continued, "You might not believe me, but walking away was the hardest decision I ever made, because like you, I never stopped loving you. Even knowing what you did, I couldn't stop loving you. I just couldn't forgive you. And I knew I'd never forget." "Rick, please, let's not go there. I understand, and I don't blame you for not forgiving me. I know what I did, and I carry that shame. You've been fair with me, always cooperative when it came to our sons. You've never thrown my mistakes in my face. All I can say is thank you for giving me this time to say what I needed to. It's a gift I'll always cherish. Thank you." Rick looked at me with that unfamiliar expression again. I didn't fully understand it, but it wasn't anger or resentment, so I was grateful. I felt good, like maybe we could become friends again. I wanted to steer the conversation to safer ground. "Tell me about Jean Chambers. Last I heard she was heading towards Sirius. Is she about to become the next Mrs. Proctor?" My stomach flipped at the mention of her, but I thought if I brought it up, he'd feel comfortable mentioning his future plans. His expression shifted to surprise. Maybe he hadn't planned to talk about her. Maybe it was still too soon. He shook his head and said, "I haven't seen Jean in almost 2 years. Surprised you even remembered her." "Really? You mentioned once that you thought you might actually love her. I assumed marriage was in the cards." I was smitten at the time. She was young, ambitious, and I thought I could keep up. Boy, was I wrong. We broke up not long after. "I said I'm not seeing anyone now. Haven't been with anyone since her." "But why?" I couldn't help asking. "You're still as attractive as ever, and you have everything a woman would want. You're successful, good-looking, great in bed, and well off. What's stopping you?" "I just haven't found anyone who satisfies me completely. The women I've dated were either too pushy, not assertive enough, bad in bed, or just looking for someone to take care of them. None of them had what I needed." He paused, then looked at me seriously. "There was one who had it all, but it didn't work out." I took the bait, eager to hear more. This was my Rick. Even if what he said hurt me, it was wonderful to just sit here and talk with him. "Why didn't it work out? Was she foolish enough to let you slip away? Who was this crazy woman?" "It was you. And yes, she was foolish. She pushed me away. It's too bad because she was perfect for me." My breath came in shallow gasps. This was it. My chance for something I had given up hope on ever having again. If I didn't take the risk now, I would regret it forever. I might crash and burn, but I'd go down fighting. Heart in hand, I went for it. Maybe she learned her lesson, Rick. Maybe she's smarter now and knows what she'd have with a man like you. Maybe she's ready for you now, ready for a life together with all that comes with it. I'm sure she wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Do you think that's possible? Could she be different this time? Why wouldn't she make the same mistakes again? He asked quietly. I don't think I could take that kind of pain again. It hurt too much the first time. I think she'd rather die than make those mistakes again. She knows how much pain she caused those she loved. I think she'd die before doing that again. In fact, I know she would. I know it with all my heart. Rick looked at me and I held my breath. Could he forgive me? Had time softened his heart enough to dull the pain I caused him, allowing him to love me again? I looked into his eyes, holding his gaze, hoping the person I had become would be clear if he looked closely enough. He said nothing but reached for my hand. I gave it to him, still holding my breath. If he didn't speak soon, I felt like I would burst. This night had taken a turn I never expected. He had gone all the way back, offering a chance I thought was lost forever, and I wasn't sure I could hold on much longer without screaming. I believe you because I want to believe you, Judith. I have to believe you if I want to be happy. I haven't been happy in the last 8 years. I've tried to forget you and move on, but that's been a failure. None of those women were you. That's who I was searching for. I finally realized that there's only ever been one woman for me. My heart soared at his words. But then he paused and his tone shifted. But Judith, the only thing I can say today is that I forgive you. I forgive you for destroying my family and my marriage. I've tried to move on for years, but I couldn't. Something was always holding me back. Now I realize it was my anger. I'm letting it go. I don't have any emotions left that tie me to you. You said I devastated you for 8 years. No, I didn't. It was the consequences of your actions. I just reacted to what you did. Now I feel nothing for you, no anger, no hate, and finally, no love. Then he stood up and walked away. Will's team lost in the quarterfinals, but we all cheered him on. He played brilliantly, and it was enough to earn him the scholarship he had worked so hard for. His father and I were so proud of him that night. He played his heart out, but accepted the loss with grace. He went on to play in college, earned a degree in business management, and joined his father's company after graduation. He worked his way up until Rick retired and passed the business to him. Along the way, Will married Jill, his high school sweetheart, and they now have 3 wonderful children. Robert earned an academic scholarship and attended Harvard. He wanted to be a lawyer, graduated with honors, and joined a law firm in New York City. He built a reputation as a fierce attorney and eventually started his own practice. He now has a team of 4 lawyers and recently proposed to a woman he met through one of his cases. They seem deeply in love, and we are hopeful for their future. Rick and I met several times over the years. He was always polite, too polite, and I could tell it was just out of courtesy. I still loved him, but he had nothing left for me. I couldn't blame him. I had made him the man he became. I kept my company, and we stayed successful in the industry. Over time, I let my partners take on more responsibility and worked less and less. When Rick handed his company over to Will, I made the tough decision to sell mine to a group of my employees. We reached an agreement, and I finally retired. I turned 60, and everyone came to celebrate. But as I mingled, smiling and chatting with everyone, I kept looking for Rick. I laughed and made small talk, but inside, I felt empty. I had a house, a car, and my sons, but no one to share my life with. Rick passed away a year later. He never remarried, all because of me. He died peacefully in his sleep. I saw him in the casket, white-haired, clean-shaven, and still handsome. Although he left me emotionally long ago, this time he was gone for good. I still visit his grave. I sit there, but I have no words for him. All I'm left with are regrets, wishing I had made different choices. But all I can do now is regret.